across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome to Morning Glory. It's 2 minutes past 6. I'm Mike Graham, and here we are. It is Tuesday, and we have entered yet another final week of January. And of course, before the end of this month, we will be probably finding out even more rubbish from Sir Keir Starmer. We found a clip yesterday of him saying, you will never have a council tax rise during my time as Labour Prime Minister. It will never go up, ever, ever, ever. Read my lips. He literally said, we will not be putting taxes up. I mean, how many more lies can this guy tell? That was just something we found yesterday. We're going to be talking this morning about the Home Office, because it turns out that they've had a little bit of a review of what they should be doing, and they've come up with some really, really interesting things that they think that they should be doing. One of them is obviously to tell you not to say certain things in case you might become an extremist. They've decided, in their wisdom, that calling somebody two-tier policing might be impossibly racist. It might possibly mean that you're a right-wing maniac. It might mean that you're akin to somebody joining the Nazi Party. This is the Home Office, Her Majesty's Home Office, saying it. On the front page of the Times today, alert over dizzying range of extremism. Apparently they've decided that everyone who doesn't agree with the government might be an extremist. Huh? I don't know. Tom Slater's here from Spiked Online. He's going to help us try and make sense of all of this, because it really is absolutely and utterly over the top and ludicrous. Front page of the Daily Telegraph says non-crime hate laws should be expanded. The Home Office think that, never mind what the last government said, do away with non-crime hate crime, because it seems to be taking the police away from actually arresting proper criminals. It turns out that the counter-extremism review has found even more extremism than they thought was there in the first place. So now what they want to do is just keep arresting people for saying the wrong thing. I mean, what sort of bleeding country are we living in? The other interesting one this morning is China. China have apparently invented a new chatbot, artificial intelligence, AI chatbot in China, and it's already wiped off $1 trillion from the leading United States tech index in what one investor called a Sputnik moment for the world's AI superpowers. So we'll be covering all of that as well. Also, Mad Ed Miliband, he's apparently admitted that he won't actually hit most of his targets. There's a giant sinkhole opened up in South Shields. I don't know if it's anything to do with global warming, but we'll keep you in touch with that. Also, HMS Agincourt. It's a warship, right? And it's been named HMS Agincourt for years and years and years, but now the worry is it might be upsetting the French. So they've renamed it because you can shoot at the French, you can fire guns at them, but what you can't do is call the ship by the wrong name. Unbelievable stuff. 0344 499 1000. As ever, we want to hear from you, and if you've forgotten how to do it, have a listen to this.
Morning, Mike. Fantastic show.
Morning, Mike. Sarah from Croydon.
Good morning, Mike. Great show.
Morning, Mike. Joan from Norfolk.
Hi, Mike. It's Frank from Bingley in West Yorkshire.
Hi, Mike. Good show. It's Amy from South East London.
Good morning, Mike. Darren from Carmarthenshire. Great show as always.
Hello, it's Judy from Alsop's, West Yorkshire.
It's a marvellous state of affairs.
Yeah, also, working from home is bad for your health. Told you. This is Morning Glory. Let's get it on. Welcome to Morning Glory at 6 minutes past 6. Tom Slater is here. Very good morning to you, Tom. We've got a lot of different stories this morning. A lot of people concentrating on the anniversary yesterday of the discovery of Auschwitz and Holocaust Memorial Day. We'll get onto that in a moment. Lots of stories about two-tier policing and extremism. But should we start with The Sun? Which has got the story of the sacked referee David Coote. Quite a strange story, this. I mean, it was strange when it came out last year, when there were, of course, videos recorded and sent to The Sun of how he was having a go at Jurgen Klopp, having a go at various other people in the world of football. He's now apparently apologising for that, because there was also one of him snorting what appeared to be cocaine. He's now said that he was driven to snort the cocaine because he's frightened of coming out in the macho world of the Premier League, because he's now declared himself to be gay. I mean, it may well be that people will have a lot of sympathy for him. I'm not one of those people, I'm afraid.
I mean, it's hard to join the dots, isn't it? I mean, you got caught doing something that you really shouldn't have been caught doing. Not only, as you say, taking illicit drugs, but also making comments about Jurgen Klopp and Scousers and Liverpool, which if you're a Premier League referee, it's probably not a great idea to be filmed doing that. A lack of judgment is a very weak way of putting it, I suppose. It may well also be the case that he struggled with his sexuality and he struggled to come out, but to connect those two that cleanly might lead some more cynical or sceptical people to suggest that this is an attempt to sort of deflect responsibility than it is actually to fess up to.
Because at least one of the videos, I think, was filmed while he was on duty for UEFA in Europe at an actual tournament. Which has nothing to do with being gay or your sexuality or anything else. It just shows you to have an appalling lack of judgment and to be somebody who's not fit for the job that you're actually paid quite well to do.
And, there is an element of this story which was... I mean, I out of all of it, I almost had the most condemnation for whoever filmed it and then, sold it or shared it around, because that way in which people's even kind of private interactions, wrong though they might be, suddenly become public fodder is an unfortunate trend. But you also do think, why, if you are a figure who is so prominent, who is on television every weekend, and there's so much controversy around any refereeing decision, to allow yourself to get into that position, obviously.
And also, he wasn't being filmed surreptitiously. He was openly being filmed. Yeah. He knew he was being filmed. In fact, I think he was encouraging to film him doing whatever he was doing. And there are plenty of other pieces of film, apparently, of him doing the rounds as well. So, anyway, that's that. Should we move on to this ridiculous story, both in the Times and in the Telegraph, about this Home Office review? Basically, claims of two-tier policing, says the Times, are an extreme right-wing narrative, according to an internal Home Office review that has recommended sweeping changes to how extremism is counted. And they go on to describe how basically extremism can be pretty much anything. Yeah. They don't really define it. They just go, well, we have to redefine extremism. So it might be that if you don't agree with me on something, or you don't agree with the Home Office or the government, you're an extremist. That
seems to be what the conclusion that they've come to. This is such a bad joke. I mean, this was this review, this rapid analytical sprint, which was the bizarre way that Yvette Cooper announced it, when they first came in to say that our extremism processes aren't up to snuff. So what they've done is they've redefined almost everyone in the country to be an extremist. That's the way that they want to sort this out. As you say, if you complain about two-tier policing, you might be a right-wing extremist. If you are concerned about grooming gangs, that's something that can be jumped upon by right-wing extremists. And this is the problem that our counter-extremism services have had for a very long time. Many reviews, many critics are pointing this out, which is that this desperate desire to put more and more people into that category demonises mainstream positions in society and also deflects attention away from where it should be, which, if you look at MI5's terrorism caseload, 3/4 of it is Islamist extremism, yet we're running around talking about talking about two-tier policing is something that should lead you to get your collar felt. Exactly, and we talked about this yesterday, and we'll talk about it some more today with Trevor Phillips, who's on later. He's written a column in The Sun today about Prevent and about how, the system actually, up until the moment that the Southport killer was referred to Prevent, seemed to work okay, because here's a guy who was somehow spotted in school as a technically dangerous individual who might be subject to becoming an extremist or a violent person, and so he was flagged up, he was reported to Prevent, and then nothing happened. And so it's the system from that point on, it seems to me, that's going wrong, because they don't really want it to be true. And therefore they go, here's an ethnic minority person, we better be very careful how we go. And also, why not? Because it's a voluntary scheme. Yeah. If the person doesn't wish to be dealt with by the voluntary scheme, then they're not. No, which seems completely mad to me. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, on the one hand, even if he was a case that could have been dealt with through the Prevent and then the Channel programme, this kind of counter-extremism thing, if they did decide he was more politically or religiously motivated, as you say, it's a voluntary scheme. If the individual is so committed, they're not going to engage with it whatsoever. Yeah. Then if you have these categories like Ruda Cabana seemed to be, which is someone who's just more generally fascinated with violence, disturbed, depraved, what have you. The idea that in a kind of very computer says no way, they're like, well, he's not an extremist by our current definitions, therefore so he's see you later. So he's not a terrorist either, by their definition, which was all invented, it seems to me, by Keir Starmer when he gave that press conference last week to basically explain why this guy wasn't reported to be a terrorist and why, at the time, it was said not to be a terrorist-related incident. Well, in a way, this is an example of like when those things fall through the cracks, because you've got a figure like this who is in possession of some terrorist material but doesn't seem to be a kind of dyed-in-the-wall anything. He's just depraved. Yeah. The idea that at that point the states were like, anyway, good luck. Yeah. Is ridiculous. It's bonkers, isn't it? It really is. And the more you read of all of this, it makes even less sense. Extremists could be opportunistic, exploiting and twisting topical issues to fit narratives. The example included grooming gangs, right? Right-wing extremists frequently exploit cases of alleged
group-based sexual abuse. What's alleged about it? There are people going to prison literally every couple of months now. There's live cases all over the place. You know, this has been going on for 20 years. We now know, thanks to people like Maggie Oliver, thanks to, you know, various different journalists who wrote, I think it was The Times that wrote about it in 2011, and all of the Elon Musk-related stuff that's been happening lately. The idea that they still say in the Home Office, alleged group-based sexual abuse to promote anti-Muslim sentiment, as well as related anti-government and anti-political correctness narratives. I mean, it's quite disgusting, actually.
Yeah, then they can't get away with this sort of deflection anymore.
And this is now we really understand probably a lot better why the Home Office is failing at all the jobs that it's meant to do. You know, whether it's the border force business, whether it's asylum seekers, whether it's sending people back, whether it's deporting people, whether it's prosecuting people. You know, all of that is obviously not being done properly because the people in the Home Office think this stuff rubbish.
No, absolutely. They're institutionally, politically correct. The Home Office, the counter-extremism services, that's why you've got a situation in which a review like this can come out, a situation in which Prevent is spending vast amounts of its time on right-wing extremism as opposed to Islamist extremism, even though we all know where the main threat comes from. Right. And I thought it was interesting the speed with which the Labour Party, particularly Dan Jarvis, but also people around Yvette Cooper, quickly disavowed this review, said they rejected its recommendations. I think that indicates that they at least recognise that they can't carry on making statements or being attached to statements like this anymore because the public won't have it, and that's a small, you know,
I suppose a small step in the
lining.
right direction. I mean, clearly they think that it's right-wing extremism to talk about grooming gangs. Well, it isn't. It's not right-wing extremism to talk about two-tier policing, because it is something that exists in this country and everybody sees it. We've all seen it with our own eyes, you know. Even now, pro-Palestinian marches go on and people barely get arrested. I mean, they've only started now arresting people a little bit more than they used to, but at the beginning there was literally no arrest being made at all. You know, absolutely ridiculous. We've got lots and lots of clips for you this morning, by the way. We're going to start getting to them because one of the things we're going to talk about is all of the coverage in the papers this morning of what happened at Auschwitz yesterday. But I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to kick it off with something that happened yesterday on ITV, right? This is Good Morning Britain. If you listen carefully, you might wonder whether there's a word missing from this particular report.
King Charles will become the first British head of state to visit Auschwitz-Birkenau later today as part of events to mark 80 years since the liberation of the Nazi death camp. 6 million people were killed in concentration camps during the Second World War, as well as millions of others because they were Polish, disabled, gay, or belonged to another ethnic group.
Yeah, millions of people and some other people. I mean, the word missing would be...
It's on the tip of my tongue.
It's on the tip of my tongue. What can you say? Maybe the autocue at ITV rejects the word and you can't actually write Jewish in there, or Jew. You know, how about Jewish, 6 million Jewish people were killed? What's wrong with saying that?
You can only pray that this was just some horrendous slip-up. But this is a slip-up that keeps happening. I don't think it was. You know? I can say with pretty much surety that it was not a slip-up. Because there is this tendency, whenever the Holocaust comes up, this unique horror, the greatest crime of history, to want to kind of generalise it. So people will swiftly say, well, of course, many other people were killed. Yes, but that's not what the point.
But they've managed to say 6 million people and many other people without actually mentioning Jewish people.
To actually omit Jewish people. What usually happens
they've omitted them.
What usually happens is they mention the tremendous Jewish suffering and then will make a point of saying that other people suffered, which is true. But in this case, which is true, but also it's this weird attempt to try and generalise what was obviously a very specific, concerted, totally unprecedented and horrific campaign to exterminate Jews from Europe. That was the point of the Holocaust, the final solution. To try and just present it as just another form of bigotry and hate amongst many is to engage in a form of like relativising the Holocaust, to dilute it. So that goes on all the time. To completely admit the Jews from the story completely... That's a new low.
I think it is.
I don't know how they could have even ended up in this position.
No, I can't imagine how they got there. But I mean, it's typical of what happens in this day and age now, where you've got people who have got sort of, you know, relativism running through their veins and say, yeah, but what about this? You know, we had the same problem with the President of Ireland the other day, making a speech. He was asked not to make a speech about, you know, what was happening currently in the Middle East while making a commemorative speech about the Holocaust. But he did it anyway. And then they started dragging people out who were complaining. It's ridiculous. Anyway, we'll come back to that. A lot of coverage this morning. King Charles, of course, was over there as well. Princess Kate as well, the Princess of Wales. We'll also bring you more on David Coop. We've got a couple of clips of him talking about this story that's on the front page of The Sun. This, of course, is Morning Glory. We'll be back after this.
Have you noticed the difference? He has come back and he has shown what you can do if you're prepared to get tough, to get serious on big issues. And every single day he does this, puts the lie to that claim that some of these things are really serious. These are really complicated issues. Yes. We can't solve this. Yes, you can. Now look, these policies are exactly the kind of policies that people in this country want to see. It's called populism for a reason.
I never understand why populism is a dirty word.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is...
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 20 minutes past to 6. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. Of course, Tom Slater is here as well from Spiked Online. Mick says, right, they'll be saying the Holocaust Memorial was a right-wing gathering soon, the way things are going. Absolutely right. Nicola from Norfolk says, morning, Mike, the leaked extremism report shows the Home Office up for what it is, not fit for purpose. It needs shutting down, clearing out and starting again. So much of our civil service actually could do with that. You know, just put a great big pipe cleaner in through the front door and clean out the entire office of the Home Office and start with people who actually have a sense of normality and a sense of purpose and a sense of actually doing something good for this country, as opposed to continually looking for reasons to arrest people for doing something that they don't agree with. I mean, it's just mad. Let's get a voice note from Laura.
Morning, Mike. Laura in Wiltshire. I just wondered how on earth the mainstream media and the godforsaken Angela Rayner managed to put out information about the King visiting Auschwitz for the anniversary and all sorts of things about the Holocaust without actually ever mentioning Jew or Jews. It's quite extraordinary and so embarrassing. Great show.
It absolutely is. It's really incredible how they've managed to do that on ITV. Morning, Mike, says Steve. Did I read this last weekend that Bradford Council have voted down a request for a local inquiry into grooming gangs in the city? Apparently, if they have one, the scandal would dwarf the Rotherham scandal. So, surprise, surprise, they don't want one. This is why a national inquiry is needed. Why is more not being made of this? Steve, it's a good point in Huddersfield. I think I did read that they've decided not to do a local inquiry. This is part of the problem, isn't it, though, with the whole, Yvette Cooper strategy, where she's gone, oh, well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to do a series of local inquiries, some of which may be related, some of which may have overlapping, evidence, because there might be similar people involved from one town to another. But this is why they need a national inquiry. And the only reason they're not really doing it is because Keir Starmer doesn't want to have to go back on his word, it seems to me.
I think, and there's also no doubt a lot of terror both within particular councils but at the national level as well about how much just the Labour Party's fingerprints will be all over this. As far as they were running a lot of these councils for a very long time when this decades-long abuse was taking place. Yes. So that's going to raise questions about turning a blind eye, about not taking this seriously. We've seen that in the inquiries we've already seen. To then roll that out across the country is obviously a...
and obviously now, when you know that Yvette Cooper's sort of department, if you like, believe that in fact mentioning grooming gangs is in fact some kind of exploitative right-wing manoeuvre to try and demonise Muslims. I mean, it really does beg a belief, doesn't it? Let's go back just to the Sun front page for a moment. Let's have a look at it. I was too scared to come out as gay, says sacked referee David Coote. I think we can see the Sun front page shortly. Basically, he says the cocaine was his escape, and he was not sober when he made his rant about the Jurgen Klopp. I think we've got a clip here of him talking about how he has struggled.
Personal context. For me, it goes way back and relates to struggles that I've had over the course of time around my self-esteem, and that relates to my sexuality. So I'm gay, and I have struggled with feeling proud of being me over a long period of time. I've felt a deep sense of shame.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if he was straight having that conversation with us, saying that, I mean, I don't think anyone in this day and age, I think I'm right in saying, would demonise somebody, even in football, for being gay.
And
would they?
Well, it is one of those things where it's probably a debate that football is yet to have in the same way that it has with other forms of bigotry, shall we say. But, you don't have to be some horrendous, heartless cynic to think that there's something a little bit unseemly about being caught doing something you shouldn't have done. And whatever the context for it is, whatever past troubles you've had that might have led you into a situation where you are taking drugs, where you are doing things that you shouldn't do, it can't help but look like a deflection and to cheapen the issue that you claim to be wanted to talk about, which is, the inability of people to come out in football or whatever. It just feels a bit... It was going to strike people as a bit tawdry, I think. I think
so. A lot of pictures on the front page this morning of Princess of Wales Kate. Kate's candle for Holocaust victims, it says on the front of the Telegraph. Lights a candle during the Holocaust Memorial Day service at Guildhall in London, where she also met Jewish survivors of the genocide. Meanwhile, King Charles became the first British monarch to visit Auschwitz yesterday, and they've got a picture of him on the front of the Daily Mail wiping a tear away at the ceremony in Poland. They've got quite a powerful front page as the royals mark the 80th anniversary of the Auschwitz liberation. Before that gateway of death, they gathered for the last time the handful of eyewitnesses to history's greatest abomination. I mean, it's one of those stories, isn't it, that no matter how many times you hear it and watch it and sort of take it in, it's so shocking what happened there. And you can't quite believe it.
No, absolutely. And the way in which people seem to forget in the contemporary period the lessons that we should be gleaning to there, the kind of shocking polls that you see from time to time about the number of young people in particular who don't really know what it was. In some cases, even a kind of creeping suspicion as to whether or not it actually took place around the fringes. This is an alarming indication that never forget, as it were, is not really being lived up to at the moment, especially in the context of the horrendous anti-Semitism that we've seen explode in the course of the past 2 years.
Absolutely, and particularly nowadays with what's going on in the Middle East. Ernie says this: do you know what got to me today on the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz? It was when the lady said that she was 6 and she asked her mother what was all that smoke and the terrible smell, and she told her the truth because she didn't want to lie to her, and she then said she wasn't afraid because she thought that's just what happens to us Jews. It broke my heart. It is extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, there's been some great movies made about it. I mean, Schindler's List, for me, is one of those just incredible. I know it's not about Auschwitz, but, you know, it's just an incredible story of people's courage in some ways and other people's absolute barefaced savagery.
No, absolutely.
Hard to believe that humans are capable of both those things.
Completely.
Isn't it?
No, and it's one of those things where this is why these anniversaries are so important, not least because many of these survivors won't be at the next big commemoration.
Yeah.
We are sort of in danger of letting slip what needs to be learnt from that particular period in history, and particularly right now, in which that period in history gets used and abused and weaponised and used to knock down politicians. People don't particularly like the unique horror of it, and why that it's so important that not only just bigotry in general, but anti-Semitism, this poisonous, conspiratorial, annihilationist ideology is kept in its box. Is so important, but that often gets missed nowadays in a debate that never seems to take a lot of those lessons seriously.
Well, the Home Office is obviously more interested in non-crime hate incidents, clearly. Let's talk about China, because an amazing story on a lot of the front pages this morning. Guardian's got it, Times has got it. China's mounted its most serious challenge to American dominance in AI after one of its startup companies created a powerful new program at a fraction of the cost of its US rivals, a thing called DeepSeek, which appears to have wiped $1 trillion off the US stock market, which is quite remarkable, isn't it? So basically it's a Chinese version of chatbot. No, I don't really understand what chatbot is already, so I mean, maybe you could explain to me what the Chinese version is.
Yeah, I mean, because people have heard of ChatGPT, they've heard of the American kind of AI companies who have been taking the world by storm in recent years. It was always going to happen that at some point China were going to enter this space in a big way. They've been putting a lot of money behind this, and obviously it raises a lot of questions, not just about are American companies going to be able to compete, how's that going to shake out, but also because of the fact that these companies in China that will be working on this, you know, they are very much involved with the Chinese state. This is, whilst there's always going to be some, at that level, coordination between some of these huge tech companies and the government. We've seen, obviously, Donald Trump putting a lot of money behind these new platforms for AI research. It obviously takes on a lot more sinister character when you're talking about the Chinese Communist Party and the way in which this can be manipulated. But this was always coming down the track, and I think that's why you saw the Trump administration last week make that big announcement with OpenAI, with all of the big tech people saying we were going to put...
This is a big $100 billion project with the data centres and all that. Absolutely. But I mean, the problem, I suppose, for using Chinese versions of it is that, from my understanding, chatbots basically and ChatGPT and everything operate with a combination of what's put into it, and so it will respond in that way with the knowledge that it has from inside, as it were. If you don't put things into it, it won't tell you those things. So in China, if it's censored in some way, and therefore you can't get certain answers out of it, it won't be really a true representation of reality, will it?
You know, that's a really good point. So there's that kind of sinister element to it. I suppose there's also a question about, you know, if an AI is only as good as the information that you give it, if you are giving it censored information, restricted information, because you are a totalitarian state, effectively, and it's filtering what these companies can do, is that also going to scupper their own efforts because you're just putting bad after bad? That would be an interesting question going forward. Can these tools still develop and be quite significant, even if they're being controlled to such a degree?
Sort of manipulated, Well, I mean, one of the things that is worrying Americans is that basically these people have put this together for about £6 million. It's been developed, DeepSeek, for £6 million, whereas in America, sort of composite other organisations have spent 100 million to £1 billion pounds or dollars in sort of inveigling theirs. And there's a company called Nvidia, which has apparently lost $550 billion overnight. It used to be the world's most valuable public company. Now it isn't.
No, it's incredible. It's incredible what a kind of fragile lead it seems like America had over this particular area. And you know, even though I think there's a lot of over-claiming about AI, people acting as if it's going to transform everything instantly, when sometimes you play around with these tools and you think they're often a lot more in their infancy than people like to let on. This is clearly where the focus, the money is going to be, and it's now taken on this almost, Cold War style space race dimension to it. So it'll be fascinating to see how that plays out.
Absolutely. I think we got a clip from Donald Trump talking about it, because he's a bit concerned about all the money that seems to have disappeared out of the stock market.
We're going to be placing tariffs on foreign production of computer chips, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals to return production of these essential goods to the United States of America. They left us and they went to Taiwan, which is about 98% of the chip business, by the way. and we want them to come back. And we don't want to give them billions of dollars like this ridiculous program that Biden has. Give everybody billions of dollars. They already have billions of dollars. They've got nothing but money, Joe. They didn't need money. They needed an incentive. And the incentive is going to be they're not going to want to pay a 25, 50, or even 100% tax. They're going to build their factory with their own money. We don't have to give them money. They're going to come in because it's good for them to come in. They're giving them money. They don't even know what they're going to do with it. I had people tell me, we have no idea. We didn't need money. They don't know if they're probably going to use the money to build in other places, other countries. It's a ridiculous plan, very expensive and ridiculous. The only way you'll get out of this is to build your plant. If you want to stop paying the taxes or the tariffs, you have to build your plant right here in America. That's what's going to happen at record levels.
Seems to be working so far, this tariff plan, doesn't it? I mean, he managed to get the Colombians to change their minds on bringing the migrants in, and now he's saying basically all of these superconductor companies are going to have to build factories in America, otherwise he's going to charge them a load of money.
No, absolutely, and that was the thing about these tariffs. They're a tool, as far as Trump sees them, to get what he wants. And as you say, so far it's been effective. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see what happens soon. Coming up, we're going to talk about bins and council tax and all the sort of things that affect people's everyday lives here in the United Kingdom. Believe it or not, Sir Keir Starmer, before the election, said council taxes would never rise under Labour because you can rely on them to keep the taxes low. Well, that turned out not to be true either. We'll bring you that, plus a lot more, with myself and Tom Slater coming next.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's Mike Graham here, 6:35. We're here for 4 glorious hours, of course, every single weekday morning from Monday to Friday. The weather, I'll tell you what, the weather yesterday was so horrible. We got one storm sort of folding into another storm. You know, at any given time you could have walked out the door and got completely soaked or had the sun shining on you. And then last night there was battering of windows and doors going on, and I sort of peeked out the window at one point, and there was the most torrential rain, sort of sideways going down the street. And there's quite a bit of flooding, I think, this morning as well. There's been quite a bit of railway disruption, as there was yesterday. I spoke to Simon Calder yesterday, who was at King's Cross Station, who said that, great news, we've just sent a train to Edinburgh for the first time since last Thursday, right? for a combination of reasons, but I mean, mostly weather-related, but also because they were doing all sorts of things. So I do feel a bit sorry for anyone who's trying to get around the country at the moment. But do let us know if it's particularly bad where you are, and we can pass it on to other people. Let's talk a little bit about Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, who hasn't really been in the news an awful lot lately. I mean, it's been not too bad of a week for him. He started off with a phone call from Donald Trump on Sunday night, the alleged 45-minute phone call, which I'm saying I'm not quite buying. It doesn't sound like a 45-minute phone call to me. But let's have a look at what he said about a variety of things. You know, we've often caught him out saying that, you know, they're not going to put up, they're not going to take away the winter fuel allowance, they're not going to put up energy prices, there's going to be energy caps, all of that. This is the first time we've discovered, because we now know council tax is going up in some places by as much as 25%. But this is what he said just before the election.
Labour would freeze council tax next year. Yes, you heard it right. Not a penny more on your council tax. Not a penny more than the bill you paid last year.
I mean, why does he just keep lying? I mean, it's almost pathological now. You know, why would you say something like that if you know there's a chance that it won't be true?
It's on everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
As well? I mean, partly it's U-turning on things that he pledged even at the election, which is his willingness to do that is incredible.
Right.
But every issue, you know, Heathrow came up the other week. He's on record as being vehemently against Heathrow expansion. He's now changed his mind. Brexit, he's had to begrudgingly change his mind and claim not to go near it.
But we used to call it a U-turn in when he was in sort of opposition, because he would suddenly change his mind in opposition. But now he's promising things before an election which are blatant, barefaced lies.
Yeah. And that's for all this talk in recent years about the Tory party being the most sort of mendacious and lying political organisation ever, because, like all political parties, they've got a tendency to tell a few porkies. I think Keir Starmer and people who bought that from the Labour Party are now being confronted with the fact that politicians often do this kind of thing. What's fascinating about Keir Starmer is he has this image of himself as being so morally upstanding.
Yes.
And yet, how, you know, clip after clip, U-turn after U-turn.
And it's not just, you know, we will seek to keep your council taxes low, or something like that.
Some form of words that lets you get away with it.
No, this is barefaced, you know, not a penny more were his words, not a penny more. Taxes will not go up under Labour. And it's just simply a lie. It's not even just a U-turn, it's a lie.
And especially in an age where people can pull up these clips very easily. You don't even need a newspaper or a broadcaster.
They're all running
to dig them
on
out.
social media.
People just find them themselves. It's so dumb as much as anything else.
It really is. Now, possibly the story of the day, and you may be forgiven for disagreeing with me, but there's a woman in a wheelchair being chased by a police car, right? Now, this is in Sheffield, where this woman in question was apparently accused of shoplifting in some way, shape or form. The police were called. Perhaps the most surprising story is that when the police were called, they actually turned up in a car, right? Extraordinary. In time to actually catch the assailant. But have a look at this. They put the siren on. There's not much noise on this. You can't really hear it. They then try to apprehend the woman who's travelling not very quickly on a motorised wheelchair, right? Or some kind of disability vehicle. A couple of times they pull in front of her and she just goes round.
What the fuck is going on?
What's happening?
It really is. I mean, somebody actually put the Benny Hill music on social media. They twice tried to cut across her path, and they're calling it in rather sort of humorous terms a chase. It's not really a chase. They're doing about 6 miles an hour.
I mean, if the police can't, you know, win a high-speed chase of a motorised wheelchair, you know, there's no hope for them, really, in terms of cracking down on, shall we say, slightly more difficult to capture criminals.
Locals were asking why, for example, the officers didn't get out of the car and actually just run after her, because that was the speed they could have caught her at. And you said the scooter came down Meadowhall Road, which is directly outside our showroom, carried on going past us. I don't know how far down the road they went. I'm assuming the police apprehended the woman in the end, but I don't know why they didn't get out and actually run after them or something. I don't know why they were trying to drive. You could run faster than that.
The battery would have to run out eventually, I suppose.
I mean, I don't want to, you know, in any way congratulate the shoplifter, obviously, but I mean, she's clearly smarter than the police. Travelling in a vehicle which is a lot slower than them, she still manages to escape. I mean, it's just bizarre, isn't it? Very strange.
Incredible.
Very strange. Let's talk about another local story, which is about bin collection, basically. This is in the Telegraph, where there's some Green organisation, Green Party, wants to have your bins collected just once a month, because that would probably mean like most of these suggestions, that you wouldn't make as much rubbish and you wouldn't throw as much away.
And it's
just rubbish, isn't it? The whole thing is rubbish.
And this is Bristol City Council, which the Greens have. It's been a bit of a foothold for them.
It's the People's Republic of Bristol now, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's they've come up with this idea. And again, it's dressing up terrible public services as if it's like an environmental good. It will be better for the environment. It will be better for this, that, and the third. It's got shades of when the Greens were in control of Brighton Council, and there was a huge row over bins piling up for weeks on end.
Yeah.
And it's just become a story of how whenever the Green Party manages to get control of even, one council, just the fundamental mismanagement, because the fact that they genuinely think that eco-virtue signalling is more important than doing the local services that a council is supposed to perform.
Yeah.
So,
but they also have, it seems to me, both Labour and anything left of Labour, and in that I include the Greens. They've got this kind of real, hard line to sort of crack a nut. Their view of how to make people throw out less rubbish is to stop collecting it. Right, okay then, because people will just go, well, I can't throw it away, so so what are they supposed to do with it? Eat it? I've got some rubbish here, I'll just sort of swallow it or something, or set fire to it.
And this is why these Green parties and so on, they're ultimately their own worst enemy, because who is going to vote for the party that is leading to them having to pile up their bins in the street for weeks and weeks on end? Like, it just strikes people as ridiculous. Like, there's certain things that people are willing to put up with to quote-unquote save the planet.
Yes.
But I think people are being confronted by the fact that they're being asked to put up with a hell of a lot, including having to live in their own filth, effectively, in order to keep these people happy.
And all of these, these kind of ideas that you could have 7 different bins, and it's all very well if you live in a place where there's room for 7 different bins, but an awful lot of people don't live in a place where there's room for 7 different bins, and so inevitably the street's either cluttered up with loads of bins, or you keep it all inside the house, and so you've got to have one room specially designated as somewhere to just put the rubbish.
No, it's ridiculous. And people have had enough of this now. They could indulge this stuff in when times were a little bit better, but now
they've just had enough. I mean, when we did the story yesterday about council tax going up by as much as 25%, but in a lot of places at least by 10%, most people will just say, I just want them to do the things that we're supposed to be paying for, like filling in the potholes, like actually emptying the bins, and perhaps running the schools properly.
That's why people are so. I mean, everyone's going to be annoyed when council tax goes up, but it feels like a particular slap in the face when they feel like that money's just pouring into a black hole. They're not seeing their local community improve. If anything, they're seeing the basics not being attended to. This is what makes people sceptical of these things, even more so than they usually would, because it's hitting them in the pocket.
Yeah, absolutely right. Let's move on to the 100 Years' War, because you can always rely on the Times to put some really great pictures in there. They've got a picture of the Battle of Agincourt as depicted in the sort of 15th century. The government has been accused of craven political correctness after it approved a Royal Navy request to change the name of HMS Agincourt to avoid offending the French. It's a warship, right? I'm assuming that warships offend people because they tend to fire guns from them that can kill people. It's quite an offensive operation, isn't it?
I mean, the extent to which you get political correctness even within the armed forces, nominally charged with, when it comes to it, having to kill people and go to war, is an alarming indication of where we're at. Also, the idea that the French have been mortally offended by this and would have caused a diplomatic incident if this could have continued.
How dare
for
you
any
call
longer.
a ship after a battle that we lost? Well, there isn't many that they won, are there? I mean, you can't really think of one, can you? I can't.
It's ridiculous. But like I say, the fact that you get this even in the armed services these days is alarming.
I mean, they've got HMS. They've changed the name to HMS Achilles by the looks of it. Is that not going to upset somebody? The Greeks, maybe? They might not like that. It's their Achilles heel.
Cultural appropriation.
Yeah, absolutely right. The Royal Navy added 6 ships that previously borne the name, earning 6 battle honours, including the River Plate and Okinawa. So the HMS Agincourt is a name that's been around in the Royal Navy for a very, very long time. Grant Shapps actually says renaming the HMS Agincourt is nothing short of sacrilege. The submarine carries a name that honours a defining moment in British history. Under Labour, woke nonsense is being put ahead of tradition and our armed forces' proud heritage. Just mad, isn't it?
Yeah. And what names are they going to come up with next as well? It just becomes this really sanitised,
well, you know what we'll end up with?
Specific,
we'll end up with what Sadiq Khan's done to the overground, the Windrush line and the suffragette line. You know, you get HMS Suffragette or something like that.
HMS Lioness.
It's HMS Lioness, yeah, because they came third in the World Cup or something. I mean, really. Anyway, 6:46. This is a Morning Glory. We'll have more after this.
Have you noticed the difference? He has come back and he has shown what you can do if you're prepared to get tough, to get serious on big issues. And every single day he does this, puts the lie to that claim that some of these things are really serious. These are really complicated issues. Yes. We can't solve this. Yes, you can. Now look, these policies are exactly the kind of policies that people in this country want to see. It's called populism for a reason.
I never understand why populism is a dirty word.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. I'm Mike Graham, and this, of course, is the home of common sense. It's the only place to get unadulterated and unfiltered truth, because everywhere else you go, they tend to sort of edit things in a way as to try and mislead you, which we don't do here. Paul in South Wales says, I was subjected to fortnightly visits by the Home Office by a man who admitted he hadn't got a clue why he was there. The reason given was I reposted the wrong meme. Incredible. And talking about that ITV clip, Andy says, Mike, I can't actually believe what I just heard. That report about the Holocaust and no mention of the Jewish people. What on earth is going on? And Peter says, Mike, isn't it strange that we never hear far left extremism mentioned in the media? There's plenty around, just not spoken of. How can you tell if Starmer and his barmy army are lying? Just watch their lips. Yeah, absolutely right. Tom Slater's here from Spikes Online. We've got a little clip for you, Tom. Once again, Just Stop Oil are back. I mean, I guess you can always tell when they're back because the holidays are over and they've managed to recoup themselves into their whatever their normal sort of jobs are. They're not flying around the world, you know, enjoying themselves in Seychelles and places like that. This is last night in the West End, The Tempest, which is a new play starring Sigourney Weaver. You know, so it's quite sort of, you can just see them there bringing on their orange banner. I'm not quite sure what the orange banner says, but they also apparently had a confetti gun. with them. I mean, the irony of this to me is that most of the people who go to the theatre in London are probably quite well aware of climate change. Some of them might even be believers in it, and there might even be people who drive electric cars because they've probably got a bit of money, and there might even be people who actually recycle everything. So I mean, they're kind of preaching to the converted here, aren't they?
I think this is one of the things that really turned the mood against them, is that originally they would focus their efforts almost entirely on the working class, like it would be people trying to get to work, people trying to drive to their next job.
After they got dragged off the top of that underground train in the East End of London by people who are actually going to work, they sort of thought maybe we shouldn't be doing this.
Absolutely, you know, they stopped going for the snooker and they started going for the opera or showing up at the British Library. And I think they're sort of throwing soup at Van Gogh. And at that point, people started to think, OK, we've had enough of this now. These are, as you say, probably Guardian readers.
They're just idiots.
You know, audiences who are still thinking this has gotten a bit too much now. Like these, if you cannot even abide a West End theatre production because you are so gripped by your apocalyptic terror, there's obviously something wrong with you. And
there is.
This isn't about politics. This is about your own mania.
Yeah, absolutely right. And protester Hayley Walsh is quoted in a piece in the Mail today, which is 42 years of age, a lecturer, believe it or not, and mum of 3 from Nottingham. She said, "I'm scared for my children. I can't sleepwalk them into a future of food shortages, life-threatening storms and wars for resources." Well, that's something completely different, isn't it? I mean, wars, you know, sorry, that's got nothing to do with climate change. I mean, people have wars, but why is that part of Just Stop Oil?
It's a whole theory they have, is that everything's going to go to hell in a handcart because of climate change, that it's going to lead to society to break down, there's going to be wars everywhere. You hear the stuff that they're fed and you can kind of understand why they're so extreme, why they think nothing should get in the way of their protests. But no one else really believes this. These people aren't concerned about climate change or whatever. They're hysterical about it, they're apocalyptic about it, and everyone has switched off from them now. They've 100% been
they've made themselves a laughing stock. Yeah, they've made themselves a laughing stock. Apparently the banner said over 1.5 degrees is a global shipwreck. Is that supposed to be some reference to The Tempest?
I suppose it is.
And Shakespeare.
And I can't imagine the audience are thinking, "Oh, that's clever."
Yeah,
you've ruined my evening, but that's clever. Well done.
Most of the audience are basically saying, you know, this is a complete and utter travesty. Idiots, get off. You know, they were booed. I mean, as you say, I mean, if they did it in a place which was perhaps a bit more working class, they'd probably be given a good shoeing.
Yeah.
The other story in the paper today, which is quite amusing, page 17 of the Times, a 78-year-old climate protester has had her prison term extended by 20 days for being unlawfully at large. I mean, it doesn't sound like she's that much of a threat, to be honest, because government contractors could not find a tracking bracelet that fitted her wrist. I assume because it was too big as opposed to being too small.
No, absolutely.
She doesn't look like a particularly large woman.
And it's one of those things where there's something about the idea of a 78-year-old protester being unlawfully at large, which sounds quite amusing. It is a reminder, though, a lot of these protesters are of an advanced age, shall we say.
You will not believe this, she's a retired teacher from Bristol.
This is,
I mean, how shocking is that?
For a Just Stop Oil
incredible
sort of protester. This isn't just sort of, you know, art students who've taken a day off from bugging off at Goldsmiths to go and cause some trouble. There's a lot of quite older people who are particularly gripped by this. I mean, I know they've got more time on their hands, and maybe that's got something to do with it. But time and again, you've got you know, pretty solid retirees who are getting involved in this stuff now. So maybe that's an extremism threat we need to worry about, is the green pension.
Well, I wonder if the Home Office has got them under surveillance, because, I mean, this particular woman actually did disrupt the M25 in November 2022, so quite a long time ago. Carla Denyer, who of course is Green MP for Bristol, has criticised the Ministry of Justice's decision to extend her prison term, and her brother says, "How has it proved so impossible to fit this normal-sized woman who desperately wants to have an electronic monitoring with any of the many different forms of monitoring available to the authorities? This was true of the time she was waiting at home and has continued to be true in the months since she has been back in prison." Well, I'm sorry, Ms Delap, but maybe you shouldn't have committed a crime in the first place, and then you wouldn't have been anywhere near a bleeding prison, would you?
I mean, that is what it comes down to. These people think they were going to be applauded for breaking the law, and the soft touch they got originally from the criminal justice system was insane. You had judges who were congratulating them on their good efforts, even as they, you know, send them down for their pretty piffling sentence.
Yes,
that's changed now because obviously the rules toughened up. And it's worth reminding people. People say this is about protest. Oh, this is a crackdown on protest. If that was the case, I'd be concerned about it as well. There's no absolute right to block the M25, and yet people seem to have convinced themselves that there is if they happen to agree with the people doing it.
More news on the ridiculously stupid people who like to demonstrate about almost anything. Police arrested 12 people in an operation where officers had to abseil down Oxford's Radcliffe camera after it was occupied by students protesting about the war in Gaza. Now, you'll like this one, because this was organised by members of the Oxford Action for Palestine group, which must be really, really influential in the Middle East, I'm sure. Apparently they seized the camera, part of the Bodleian Library on Friday, and they claimed that they were going to rename the building the Khalida Jarrah Library. And what's the point of these people? I mean, why don't they just get on with their lives?
Because it's about them.
Or go to bleeding Gaza and help some people and do something properly.
The idea that the people of Gaza will happen upon this and be filled with a sense of pride. This is about them feeling good about themselves, feeling radical.
Look at me, I'm waving a Palestine flag.
Feeling interesting.
Yeah.
It's trying to exploit someone else's tragedy to boost your own ego. It's embarrassing. It'll make no difference. They know it will make no difference.
Right.
But that's not the point of it.
No, exactly. Absolutely unbelievable. Let's have a look at what David Miliband's up to, because Ed Miliband, I should say. David Miliband's trying to get Peter Manasseh's job in America, isn't he? Ed Miliband apparently is talking about collaborating with China.
In the absence of the US, if China takes on a more prominent role, what scope is there for constructive UK collaboration with China to achieve good climate outcomes for the UK?
I suppose the truth about this on China is there is no solution to the climate crisis without China, because they represent such a huge level of global emissions now. And, this is a point my US friends, Democrats and Republicans make. And so, of course, part of what we have to do as a UK government is work with China, among many other countries, to drive forward climate ambition.
He spends a lot of time in these committees, doesn't he? I'm not sure what else he does. I mean, there's also a story this morning in The Sun saying basically he will fall short of his wildly ambitious clean power targets, according to research that's been done by a climate consultancy company. Basically, a shortfall of 32 gigawatts, which is equivalent to turning on 16 million kettles at once. I don't know how you work these things out. But, I mean, clearly he is not going to achieve whatever it is. And I keep reading stories in the Sunday papers about how basically the Labour government wants to ditch him because he's become a liability.
Well, I mean, he was always going to be, wasn't it? I mean, Keir Starmer kind of came into politics, came into government, really, with these two conflicting sort of people who had completely different agendas. You've got Ed Miliband who wants to immiserate us, and you've got Rachel Reeves who at least claims to want to create economic growth. Right. You can't have net zero and economic growth. Right. That penny is slowly starting to drop with this government, and every time the kind of green agenda has been put up against what Rachel Reeves has wanted to achieve, it's always lost.
Yes.
So you do wonder how long this can go on, and maybe keeping him in committee rooms in Westminster rather than out and about actually in the public eyes is a useful thing for the government insofar as it doesn't continue to show up the fact that, even though it's too little too late, but the government is turning away from this.
It's almost as though he's sitting there as a sort of adjunct to the government, that he's not actually part of it, that he's kind of off to the side like some kind of jester. Yeah. That they kind of don't have to really... You never see him with anybody else from the government. He's just always on his own, sitting behind a desk telling people things that he thinks they want to hear.
Meanwhile, the government keeps disagreeing with him. They want to expand Heathrow now, they want to do this, that and the third. It's
pushing back all the targets, forget about the net zero by 2030 or 2040 or 2050. I mean, just ridiculous.
One to watch. Definitely.
Yeah, quite one to watch. Tom, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online, of course, with more Common Sense coming up. We're going to be joined by Theo Usherwood. This is Morning Glory. See you in a minute.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. 2 minutes past 7. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. Don't forget, it's 4 hours of glorious news, events, opinions, and the sorts of things that you only hear right here at Talk, because we are the home of common sense, the place the nation comes to talk. And you know what to do. Send us a voice note just like this.
Morning, Mike. Matt from Doncaster.
Good morning, Mike. Chris from Barnsley.
Morning, Mike. Jackie from Manchester.
Morning, Mike. Mike from High Wycombe. Lovely to listen.
Good morning, Michael. Always good to have a spot of Mike Graham in the morning.
A spot of common sense, you might even say. The revolution of common sense, as being explained by Donald Trump over the United States of America, having picked it up from us, the world headquarters of common sense. Coming up, Theo Usherwood's going to be joining us. We're going to be talking about a great many things, including later on in the show, Trevor Phillips is here to talk about the failures of Prevent. He's written a column in The Sun today. Also, we'll be talking about this ridiculous Home Office review, which appears to have been done. A couple of leaks in the papers today. Telegraph's got a version of it saying that the Home Office basically wants to expand non-crime hate laws, notwithstanding what the last government said, that this was something that they didn't want to pursue, and they wanted the police to go after proper criminals as opposed to people who said things on social media that people didn't like or were offended by. Meanwhile, an alert over the range of extremism is the version in the Times, where they say that there are so many different kinds of extremism that you might be an extremist just because you disagree with something that the Labour government said. Well, it's completely and utterly ridiculous, isn't it? Completely and utterly cooked up by the politically correct maniacs who seem to be running almost every government department in this part of the world. We've got the same problem with HMS Agincourt, a submarine which has been renamed to avoid offending the French. For heaven's sake. 0344 499 1000 is the number. Two-tier policing, apparently. If you think that's happening, you're more likely to be a right-wing extremist than not. And if I keep saying two-tier policing, it might well be that the police will burst through the door at any time and drag me out, kicking and screaming, and arrest me and hold me for hours on end before they decide to let me go. 0344 499 1000 is the number. This is Morning Glory. Let's get it on. Zoe in Lancashire says, here we go, Mike, another way to silence us. This isn't a government working for us. This is a government that is purely running on dictatorship. As a nation, we will never be allowed to say what we feel while Starmer is dragging us through another 4 years of hell. Well, not least in one of the ways that he's told yet more lies. We found a clip yesterday, last night, in fact, about council tax. Let's have a look at that, because yesterday, only yesterday, we reported that basically council tax is going up in about 10 to 15 separate boroughs. In some cases in Windsor by 25%, and in lots of other places by 15%, by 10%, by 9%. But this is what Keir Starmer said before he was Prime Minister.
Labour would freeze council tax next year. Yes, you heard it right. Not a penny more on your council tax. Not a penny more than the bill you paid last year.
It seems remarkable. Let's say a very good morning to Theo Usherwood. Theo, very good morning to you.
Well, good morning to you.
It seems remarkable to me that there are so many of these types of clips of Keir Starmer, because it's one thing to, promise something, it's one thing to kind of, suggest something, but he's so sure that these things are not going to happen. And this is not the only instance of it. I mean, what sort of an individual would make those kinds of absolutely bold statements and then completely disregard them? I mean, even by political standards.
It was political expediency at the time. So Keir Starmer identified issues that he thought were close to the public's heart, whether that be council tax, whether that be the WASPy women. And he was quick, of course, to make promises that sided him on the right side of the British public, with the British public against the government of the day. That's what he did, right? Now, the problem he had was he wasn't able, having come into government, he wasn't able to back it up. So whether it be the winter fuel allowance, whether it be council tax, or whether it be the WASPy woman, he's ended up in a situation where he's had to break those promises. And the British public, and it's always been the case, Mike, trust is hard earned and easily lost. The British public don't really care for that. They don't mind you telling it like it is, right? They don't mind politicians telling them like it is, that times are really tough. We've got to be honest from the outset. What they don't like is they don't like hypocrisy. They don't like being told one thing and then, or you know, a pivot. They don't like being told one thing and then something else turns out to be true. And that's the problem he's got.
Well, my interest in this is slightly more, you know, from the point of view of the mentality of somebody. I mean, is it now the case that government advisors or political advisors, if you're not in government, say, look, just say whatever you want, because at the end of the day, either one, nobody will remember, or two, you can just say that times have changed and things have changed and the world has moved on and now we can't do that. But it's almost like there are different... I mean, he could have said that in a variety of different ways. He could have said, you know, look, we understand that, you know, local councils are under pressure, but we will do our level best to make sure that council tax does not rise when we get into power. Instead of which, he makes a big song and dance about it and says, not a penny more will you pay. You know, he's very clear about it. It's not just a kind of suggestion that you might then find fault with later on. It's an absolute hard-fire promise.
Yes, you're quite right. There is a way of couching it, and there are issues. If you think back to the election, where people were saying to Rachel Reeves, for instance, that you can see the books, you can see the way the public finances look, and you know, you can be perfectly honest about whether they're going to be tax rises. And she danced on the head of the pin and said, well, actually, you know, later on we didn't know the details. But I think it's best if you're providing, you know, as a in opposition, to be as honest as possible. But the sensitivity that Labour have, and many of your older listeners will understand this. This isn't their first rodeo with politicians who don't tell the truth, right? They will understand this. Labour have a problem when it comes to high tax and high spending, and that's what they were sensitive about. People remember what happened in the 1970s, where you had Labour governments and you had, you know, the graves weren't being dug, the bins weren't being emptied, the unions were running the show. People were very, you know, Labour was very sensitive to that charge. They would, you know, in government, it would be the same as the 1970s. It would be taking us back. And they want, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves wanted to get across the message that they could be trusted with the public finances. Unlike Jeremy Corbyn, they could be trusted with the nation's security, and they were prepared to do anything to uphold that idea that they could be trusted with both of those things. And the problem they have is, of course, they knew when they came into government, really tough decisions were going to have to be made about public spending, really tough decisions if they wanted to do the things they wanted to do. Because the alternative, of course, was to say to the trade unions, no, you can't have a public sector pay rise. You can't have that extra, you can't have that 15% RMT. You can't have that 22% junior doctors. You can't have that 7 or 8% teachers. That's the alternative. But of course, they'd also promised pay rises, or had indicated to the trade unions, if you give us our backing, we will ensure that public sector.
But they kept their word to the trade.
But
they kept their word to the trade unions, didn't they? Because they got sorted out pretty much as soon as they got in. But this also contradicts the way, you know, taxes for working people. When people used to absolutely, you know, fixate on what do they mean by working people. Does that mean they're going to tax pensioners? Does that mean they're going to tax people who aren't working? Or does it mean they're going to tax savings? It meant that they wouldn't put up council tax, because council tax is a tax on working people. So they've lied about that as well.
Yes, they're gonna. It's a tax on working people. Working people pay council tax if you're in a rented property, or if you're in if you're in your own home, you pay council tax. And it also is pernicious against people on fixed incomes. I'm thinking of pensioners. Okay, many of those pensioners are going to have a single homes discount, right? Yeah. But many of them will still be living as a couple, and they are going to be having, they don't get a discount, and it just, the tax goes up and their income doesn't go up. They've got no way. You know, in Windsor, if you're living in your home, is your salary, is your income going to go up by 25%? No. So that it's reflective of the fact that council tax is going. Of course, it's not going to go up by 25%. You are going to be materially poorer. And you know, you could say, well, it's Windsor, it's in, you know, it's a royal borough, it's a royal county, or in the royal county of Buckinghamshire. Sorry, you know, it is, you know, you can make the argument that Windsor is beyond. Actually, it's Berkshire, but you can make it's just rich people who live in Windsor. Right. But you know, actually,
but that's not true either.
That's not true either. You know, it's not a fair way to go about things. And I think, you know, the other thing about council tax is that watch what happens in this spending review to the allocation of money for Angela Rayner's communities department. Yeah. Because that's the money that goes to councils. So the reason that councils are having to put up council tax is that they have seen swinging cuts, actually, which go back to 2010. But that should, that is not a protected department, Mike Graham. So you could end up, we could, and I think this is probably very likely, whilst the NHS will get more money, because it is a protected department, the Department for Communities is likely to see cuts. And it's those cuts which then filter down to local government and pay for services. I mean, we're going to talk about prevent and money, whether prevent and miss Rudabakana. But it's also worth remembering that local government pays for things like social services. And there are going to be questions, just as there are going to be questions for prevent, there are rightly going to be questions for local councils, for local NHS provision in terms of child and adolescent mental health services, why they didn't pick up Rudabakana. And the argument will come back, well, there wasn't enough resource, or we didn't have enough
resource. But that's what they say about everything,
to deal with it.
That's what they say about everything. And then if you look at how much their budget is, and you go, well, you may be just badly allocating it. There's plenty of money swilling around in the public services. There's no shortage of people. But yet they're always claiming there's not enough people, there's not enough money. It's like the NHS are claiming, despite getting £200 billion a year, they haven't got enough money. Rubbish. They've got plenty of money. They've just got bad management.
And people want, when it comes to services, what's interesting about these particular services, right, is they're really important for keeping the public safe. Social services, whether it's Sarah Sharif, whether it's Rudabakana, completely opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of those particular cases, right? One was a very vulnerable little girl, one was a maniacal murderer who stabbed 3 people. But in both cases, we need people to do their job. And to pick up these cases and to ensure that they never reach the conclusion that tragically that they reached in both of those individual cases. And I think going into this spending review, it's going to be very interesting to see whether actually Rachel Reeves, she needs to reassure the bond markets, the money men in the square mile and beyond, foreign investors right across the world. They don't like the look of UK PLC right now. And in order to assure them and assuage any concerns that they have, we're going to see some pretty brutal cuts probably towards the end of March. And one of the departments that's going to face those cuts is going to have a knock-on impact on the ability, their money ultimately goes to the services that need to keep the British public safe from the likes of Sarah Sharif's father and from the likes of Axel Rudabakana.
Absolutely right. We're going to be talking more about extremism with Dr. Paul Stott from the Policy Exchange in a little while. But let me ask you about the Attorney General, Lord Hermer. He's in the paper again today, basically admitting that there have been times when he's had to recuse himself. And for people who don't use that word very often, it means take himself out of the room, basically, and not give advice to the government because of potential conflicts of interest. It seems to me that this guy, who's a very good friend of Keir Starmer's from his legal days, has got an awful lot of conflicts of interest because he's represented an awful lot of what you might call high-profile and sometimes controversial figures and sometimes controversial cases. So I would put it to you that actually he's not the right man to be the Attorney General.
Well, it's true. There is, the Attorney General is often appointed from the legal profession. The problem that Lord Hermer, as you rightly point out, Mike, has got is the number of cases where he's represented individuals who are acting against the British government or are being acted upon by the British government. That's the issue, and therefore there's obviously a conflict of interest. And I don't really understand why it had to be dragged out of Lord Hermer. I mean, it was going on a week before we actually got, the British public and MPs in the House of Commons in. And this was off the back of Robert Jenrick's letter, which was, a fair point to raise from the Shadow Justice Secretary, actually literally had to drag the information out of him that he had recused himself in these particular cases. It should be very easy for Lord Hermer and for the Cabinet Office and his office to be able to say whether he's provided advice in these particular cases and there was a conflict of interest. But the point you make is that there's Shamima Begum, if I remember correctly. There's also Jerry Adams, if I remember.
There's some asylum seekers coming into Britain from the Chagos Islands.
These are the British. I think it's a really simple thing when it comes to the view of the British public. Right, they want to know ultimately that the people in government are on their side. Or on the side of the British government. Do you see what I mean?
Well, at least they're on the side of Britain,
They're on the side of Britain. Your listeners want to know that Mike Graham, as their breakfast show, as their essential common sense listening in the morning, you're on their side.
Yeah, of course.
But at the same time, I also think that the British public, your listeners, also want to know that the Prime Minister and that those he appoints in government are ultimately on the side of them. They're on the side of the British people, on the side of the British taxpayer, because, you know, these cases where Lord Hermer has represented these particular individuals, they're going against the interests of the British government. We are spending taxpayers' money on lawyers to fight these cases.
Yeah.
And I'm not, on that basis, I don't understand why Keir Starmer would necessarily see that Lord Hermer, for all of his expertise, is a good appointment. It just comes down to some real basics.
He's really not a good appointment, and I don't think he's going to last. But there we are. Theo, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Theo Rushwood, political commentator, with the latest on the terrible state of this government. Keir Starmer, barefaced lying about council tax not going up under Labour, and now Lord Hermer, the Attorney General, admitting basically that he's had an awful lot of conflicts of interest with the government, so he hasn't been able to advise them on a whole series of issues. Well, so what's the point of him then? Get rid of him and find somebody who doesn't have conflicts of interest, who doesn't go around representing Jerry Adams, doesn't go around representing Shamima Begum, and doesn't go around representing asylum seekers who want to come to this country illegally. Thanks very much indeed. It shouldn't be that difficult, should it? Let's get a quick voice note from Nick.
Good morning, Mike. It's Nick Moore here from Loughborough. The same people that believe the climate nonsense and get involved in the climate hysteria are the same people that got involved in the COVID and lockdown hysteria and believed all the COVID nonsense. They're the same people that believe everything the government tells them and everything the BBC tells them. They're the people without any ability to think critically themselves.
Yeah, absolutely right. Lock them all up is what I say, until they've actually decided to cheer up. 0344 499 1000 is the number. Coming up next, we're going to talk more about extremism and what the Home Office thinks is extremism with Dr. Paul Stott from the Policy Exchange.
Need to start sending back illegal immigrants, criminals back to where they came from with lifetime bans. And if people don't like it, you know, there are tools and measures that we can use, like stopping aid, stopping visas. We should do the same thing. And sometimes genius is just doing basic things that actually somebody has to step up and do them. And I'm really hoping that Kemi, you know, new Conservative Party under new ownership, this is the sort of stuff that Kemi's absolutely got to grab. We have got to do things differently.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
7:22, welcome back to A Morning Glory. We've got a birthday to announce soon. I'm not going to do it just yet, but there is a birthday in the family, which I need to talk about, which we'll get to very shortly. Morning, Mike, says David. Council tax rises, they say follow the money. It'll be interesting to monitor how much goes into the council pensions. When I was younger, the contract was that council salaries were lower, but the pensions were the golden handcuffs. Now, the public sector salaries are equal to, if not better, and their pensions are the stuff of dreams for the private sector. It's criminal and needs to be changed. I've been banging on about this for a very long time. When I first started in radio back in about 2006-07, I was telling people that, you know, you've got to really be careful about council taxes because most of them go either to the pensions of the people working for the councils or to the salaries of those people. And you're right, the salaries used to be lower because the perks were much better than the private sector. But now the salaries are just as high, if not higher, because they keep getting pay rises. And now they've got gold-plated pensions, you know, final salary pensions. Absolutely unbelievable. Let's go talk, though, now to Dr. Paul Stott, Head of Security and Extremism at the Policy Exchange, because a couple of stories in the papers this morning about a Home Office review actually beggar belief. We've got basically the Home Office saying that any kind of extremism is a problem. Except they now define extremism as being right-wing, it would seem. Amongst the things that they're warning about, right, is that basically there are far-right tropes going around. For example, if you think that there's two-tier policing, that is obviously a far-right trope. If you think, for example, that grooming gangs are a bad thing, they might actually be just being used by right-wing extremists to exploit cases of what they're calling alleged group-based sexual abuse. It's absolutely extraordinary, this stuff. Let's talk to Dr. Stott. Paul, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
Good to see you. I mean, this is unbelievable, isn't it? I mean, we now know why the Home Office is not fit for purpose and why they can't seem to do anything about all of the problems they've got, like asylum seekers, like the border, like grooming gangs, like clamping down on you know, all sorts of horrible extremism that goes on from the Islamic side of things. They now seem to want to blame everything on right-wingers.
Well, this is an area where I'm afraid the government's got itself into a bit of a mess. The counter-extremism sprint has been running since Yvette Cooper took office as Home Secretary. It was one of the things she launched to basically check that our counter-extremism policies were fit for purpose. And I'm afraid what isn't fit for purpose is the Home Office, or certainly some of its advisors and departments. The greatest threat to the UK in terms of terrorism plots, in terms of people in prison, in terms of actual terrorist attacks, in terms of numbers killed by terrorists, comes from Islamist extremism. That's the centre of gravity for counter-extremism in this country. Unless Yvette Cooper wins that fight, then she will fail. And what we're unfortunately seeing is a desire to sort of expand the Home Office's work into a whole series of areas, some of which are problematic, some of which perhaps are unpleasant or are worthy of challenge, but they're not political extremism, they're not terrorism, and they don't threaten the security of the country. I mean, it's also the fact, some of the specific points you make in terms of attitudes towards debates around the grooming gangs, the rape gangs that we've seen in places like Rochdale and Rotherham. Some of the Home Office officials seem to have deeply politically correct, flawed views that are just trying to sort of be defensive on the issue rather than accept, look, there is a problem here, we need to do something about it.
Exactly right. And they seem to have invented a new word called the manosphere. I presume the manosphere is a place inhabited by men, like you and I, and lots of other types of men, presumably. I don't know if that includes trans men. But basically, they're talking about how spreading misinformation, conspiracy theories, and misogyny could indeed be various different forms of extremism. So, I mean, you could find yourself, for example, I don't know, making some kind of statement which is viewed by certain people as misogynistic, and you could then be termed an extremist under these new Home Office kind of guidelines, no?
Well, it's actually worse than that, and there's a whole page devoted to the manosphere and incels and misogyny, and that's the same length of focus as goes on Islamist extremism.
Unbelievable.
That's how flawed it is, and there's a section in that where they're talking about pickup artists. Now, what's particularly worrying here is that the Commission for Countering Extremism did a report into what's known as incels, men who are involuntary celibate and inhabit a sort of bit of the internet where they all sort of grumble and gripe. And this is a Home Office appointed body, the Commission, and what they found was there's some mental health issues here, there's some need for support in that area, but it's not terrorism. Yeah. And that's where the Home Office needs to focus. If it tries to do too much, it won't do anything.
Right.
And the danger with the approach that's set out in this report is you're going to create so many such a big haystack, the needles are going to be lost.
Well, they really are, and particularly in this month when we've been looking at what happened in Southport and how Prevent were completely and utterly useless in checking what was going on inside the head of the Southport killer. I don't like to mention his name. I don't like to give him publicity for that. But, they don't seem to be able to define terrorism. Keir Starmer gave that ridiculous press conference last week where he apparently tried to redefine the word and say, well, because there was no basic ideology behind what he was doing, he's not a terrorist. Well, except he is.
Well, the Prime Minister really seemed to be all over the place in that speech, and at one point he seems to be talking about terrorism as any action which terrorizes, and of course that's exactly the same problem of being too expansive. And it's notable there was quite a strong pushback. The government's advisor on counter-terrorism legislation, I just thought I think sort of rather rejected that view.
Yes.
And I'm hoping that the Home Office, they seem to be rowing back a bit in terms of this report, perhaps because it's had such a negative response since it was policy exchange, but we have to hope that wiser heads prevail. What worries me, though, Mike, in particular, is that very often in politics it's the officials who are permanent rather than the politicians.
Right.
And if the officials are getting it this wrong, then we really do have a problem.
Well, exactly, because what this tells you about the Home Office, and obviously it would be a sweeping statement to say everybody in the Home Office, but certainly, certainly very important members of that team believe this stuff. And, they've produced this advisory document for the government, a review into what should be being looked at. And it's very troubling, because for those of us who are aware of what the terrorist threat is in this country, and in that I would include all people like yourself and other experts who understand, where the danger is, to sort of try and allay people's fears about that and say, oh no, there's much more worrying things going on. People call what Keir Starmer's doing is two-tier policing. These are people that need to be locked up, and we need to be saved from these people. And also horrible, nasty right-wing bigots who make, the word alleged is extraordinary to me, where they say this. They say right-wing extremists frequently exploit cases of alleged group-based sexual abuse to promote anti-Muslim sentiment. That is plainly, completely and utterly wrong.
Yes, these issues were established in court cases 12, 15 years ago.
And they're still taking place in courts today.
Precisely, and we need to ensure not only that these cases are policed with rigour, but the deeply unpleasant aspects of them are understood and acted upon by the Home Office, and these aren't issues where they can sort of throw a veil over it so to lessen damage. We need the best way of dealing with problems is sometimes disinfectant.
Shining a light on things rather than hiding away or moving the light and going, never mind all that, look about what's going on over here. It is extraordinary. Good to talk to you, Dr. Paul Stott. Thank you very much indeed, Head of Security and Extremism at Policy Exchange. This report, I tell you what, is quite extraordinary. We didn't even get to the bit where they're talking about bringing back more non-crime hate incidents, because that is another absolutely outrageous suggestion that the Home Office is making. Coming up next, we're going to talk to Carl Hennigan, Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine, of course, at the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine in Oxford. A couple of quick tweets for you, messages rather, on Ed Miliband. Dave in South Gloucestershire: I cannot believe that Miliband is so deluded that he believes his government, working with China, will convince the communist state to accept the climate change nonsense and change their ways. The Chinese only do things that further their own interests culturally and economically. or quite. And one from Mike in Whitney who says, morning Mike, Ed Miliband and all the net zero eco-nutters on the planet need to get a life and a proper job to occupy their deluded minds. There is no climate crisis. The Earth is slowly warming due to its elliptical orbit around the sun. End of. We can't change it. Scientifically, we're still coming out of an ice age. Perhaps their plan is to reverse all the wind turbines and push the Earth away from the sun. I've done it. That's the answer. Oh, no, it's not. It'll need electricity to run the turbines, damn it. You don't want to give Crazy Ed any ideas. You know, don't tell him you can actually, propel the Earth in a particular direction thanks to all of his wind turbines. I mean, the man is not only deluded, he's also quite dangerous, I'd have to say. It's 7:32. Let's talk about the COVID inquiry coming up next.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
7:35, welcome back to Morning Glory. We are the home of common sense. We're the only place you get to talk about the kind of things we talk about. We didn't, as I say, even get onto the non-crime hate incidents. We'll get onto those in a moment. Let's get a quick voice note from Mike.
Hi Mike, Mike in Cheshire here. Keir Starmer's promises were deliberate. They were there to mislead the public. They knew exactly what they were going to do. He just promised everything that people wanted to hear. And unfortunately, people were stupid enough to believe him and voted for him.
Yeah, unfortunately, people do have a habit of believing what other people say, even politicians, which, of course, is a bit of a nightmare. Let's talk to Carl Hennigan, Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine. He's the director, of course, of that Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine in Oxford. Carl, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Let me play you a little clip first up of Kemi Badenoch, who was at the COVID inquiry, talking about public trust yesterday.
The last time I was here, I talked about WhatsApp groups, for example, family WhatsApp groups, things that government has no insight into. Even the tech companies don't really know what's being shared. It's all encrypted. And a lot of false information travels very quickly through those channels. It's everything from vaccines will kill you to the government is suppressing information. In fact, some of it often has lightly reputable sources who are backing it up. I remember we had some people from the BMA who genuinely believed that we were trying to stop information from getting out about what was happening with ethnic minorities. And when you see that on a public forum, you'll think, oh, well, if the doctors in the BMA think that, then it must be true. But even they were wrong. And then that starts to propagate. That was one of the reasons why I decided to take part in vaccine trials. That if people thought that the government was trying to kill them, then if the minister herself was taking part in trials, which are more risky than a fully tested vaccine, that might help with public trust.
I mean, there's an awful lot in that, isn't there, Carl? I mean, first of all, I completely push back against her assertion that it was wrong to say the government was trying to keep information from the public, because they were. And the issue of vaccines is no longer about whether or not the government was trying to kill people, but it was about whether or not they were properly tested and properly ready to be rolled out in the way that they were. And we know that there's now plenty of reasons to suspect that they were rushed out.
So I think there's quite a lot, like you say, Mike. First is to say the inquiry's not looking at the issue of whether the vaccines work, the safety and all of these big issues, because basically seems to be putting that to the sideline and saying, oh, what great success. And then what interests me about ministers and people in positions of power, they think what's happening is out there in society when people are talking and sharing information, somehow they're wrong. Instead of listening to them and going, they've all got genuine concerns, they're probably asking the right questions to say, no, it's misinformation. Right. That's an incredibly bad position to take. And I think Kemi Badenoch, as the leader of the Tory party, should get some better advisors on board. Right. People discuss the issues at hand. What we do is importantly listen to them, because they're probably talking about the signals of harm and going, we have hesitancy, we are importantly making decisions. And it's called sharing information and talking to your neighbours.
Right. Absolutely right. And also, I mean, this new word that seems to have crept into the lexicon of government speak is misinformation, which is a very, very big word which covers a great many things. And we've got today Home Office review published talking about, you know, how people who are peddling misinformation might in fact be somehow called right-wing extremists. You know, it's completely bonkers.
What people can't accept is, she said she participated in a trial. The reason she participated in the trial was to reduce uncertainty about the effects of a treatment like a vaccine. And in doing that, when you express uncertainty, what's happening is governments come along and say, well, you're an agent of misinformation. And all you're doing is asking questions. Yeah, right. I'm not clear about the evidence. I'm not clear about the adverse events. Actually, what about if I'm a pregnant woman in all of this, right, where there was no trial evidence and I'm asking serious questions? Now, in doing so, that's the right response. What we need to start doing is going, we need to create a better evidence base. And that's
absolutely right. Because I remember going back to the pregnancy question. I mean, pregnant women were given counter and different advice depending on who they asked. You know, at one point it was safe, another point it wasn't safe, then it was safe again. And I mean, if I was about to be a father, then I think I would have been very concerned about what my partner was going to have to do about getting a vaccine or not.
Yeah, and I think, look, this pregnancy issue is really important. There was a trial that was supposed to report by 2022. It's still not published, its results. So it's still up in the air. What is the effect in this age group where you've got not just the concerns about the woman, but the unborn child? Yeah. And that's where people start to ask questions. And I think what was happening among many of these ethnicities, they were asking the right questions, and their hesitancy didn't put them at risk, because by time of 21-22, we'd gone into the Omicron variant, which was much less severe in its reaction, and therefore they were making, as far as I'm concerned, appropriate questions, asking the right issues. And what Kemi Badenoch has come along and said, well, let's all paint it as misinformation, which I think is the completely wrong strategy.
Exactly. And it was it not proven at the end of COVID that basically there were differences in the way that different ethnic minorities were affected by the disease, and some ethnic minorities were much more badly affected by it.
Yeah, particularly early on in the early waves, what we saw is many ethnicities do very badly. In doing so, what happened is there was a failure to protect many people in the front line early on in 2020. Now, that's the issue they should be looking at. What should we be doing when we understand very rapidly some people do worse than others? And that is not being asked by this pandemic. It seems to be all about the big data. What's the data response? What's the WhatsApp responses? In fact, this inquiry is going to be the most costly ever, Mike. Yeah. It's going to be hundreds of millions of pounds when we're short of cash. And to be honest with you, it's not really going to get to the important issues.
No, and all I hear now every week, whenever there's a conversation or articles written or pieces written by people who are supposedly experts, an awful lot of the questions that we were raising, you were raising them, Julie Hartley-Brewer was raising them, I was raising them, are all turned out to be very valid questions. Like, for example, look at the damage that's been done to children who didn't go to school for 2 years. We're now reaping the rewards of that and finding out that there's an awful lot of anxiety, there's an awful lot of, insecurity, there's an awful lot of introverts now in their teenage years because they should never have been told to stay away from school in the first place, and suddenly everybody now agrees.
No, I'd agree with you. When you look at the young children, I speak to school teachers, and when they say, look, they turn up at school, they can't read, they can't actually tell the colours at age 5, and some of them are in nappies, they're going, we're in deep, deep trouble. Yeah. And in doing so, what you remember is, for about 2 years, we subjected a group of children at their formative years to a world where they never saw emotion, didn't get out much, saw everybody with a mask on their face, and now we're reaping the problems that come with that. Right. I mean, it is totally right. Adding to that the economic issues, when we had a 22 billion black hole, but apparently we spent 400 billion without even thinking about it. Actually, what's happening now is somehow we seem to be saying all of this is in the past and still not understanding how many problems this has created right now, and asking questions about why did you give away, for instance, 40 billion into a bounce back loan system overnight with no balances and checks, when now it seems you can't give away a penny without the OBR coming on board and saying, look, I'm sorry, you can't do that.
I know. It is quite remarkable, isn't it? But good to talk to you, Carl. Thanks very much indeed. Carl Hennigan, Director of the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine in Oxford. Isn't it remarkable how much of what we were saying at the time, and of course Neil O'Brien was one of those cabinet ministers in the government, the Tory government, who was taking notes and taking names down. Julie Hartley-Brewer was on the list. I think I was on the list as well. People who were supposedly celebrating misinformation and passing it out as real. Well, it was real. And apparently now everybody agrees. Let's get a voice note from Anne.
Morning, Mike. Anna, sorry. Mike, I'm a good person and I work really hard. I've just paid my tax bill. I pay tax on everything. My food is extortionate, and if council tax goes up, I'm pretty much working for nothing, and I consider myself to be in a reasonably decent situation. What realistically will the country do if council tax does go up this much?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, we had a list yesterday of all of the places where it's likely to go up by 10% or more, and we can probably re-find that for you. But the government's not going to do anything, are they? I mean, they're going to presumably pretend they never promised that it wouldn't go up. This from ATB in Merseyside. St Helens Council approved £40 million council fees and charges for a wide range of goods and services without explaining to the public what it all means. Fees for what? And services for what? And Marco from Swindon says this: when I pay my council tax this year, I will pay them the same amount as I did last year. And if they've got a problem with it, I'll just tell them to have a word with the Prime Minister, who told me I wouldn't pay a penny more. Keep up the good work. Good idea. See if you can get away with that. 7:45.
We are seeing an incredibly worrying trend in the world, a rise of distortion, denial, a concerted effort by people to continue to dehumanize Jews and delegitimize their place in society. And we must call this out for what it is. It's pure Jew hatred, this denial, this distortion. As I said, it's a concerted effort. This isn't happening by mistake. Yep. There are people going out on social media, setting up accounts with the purpose of indoctrinating our young children in this country and in others who are scrolling on social media, absorbing over 50% of their news from social media.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 7:48. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through, of course, until 10 o'clock. We've been here since 6. If you're just joining us, we've got a lot going on. We're talking about a great many things, including a Home Office review at the moment, which is trying to make out that an awful lot of people are right-wing extremists, even though they're not. They're just actually questioning things that the government does, or they might be suggesting that we have, heaven forfend, two-tier policing in this country, or there are, grooming gangs which are, in fact, raping young women on a colossal scale in towns in the north of England, mainly operated by Pakistani men. Apparently that makes you a right-wing extremist. Absolutely ridiculous. Coming up, we're going to be talking to Trevor Phillips in the next hour. He's going to talk about the failures of Prevent in that Southport case. Also, we'll be talking about bin collections down in Bristol. They want to do them just once a month to stop you from throwing so much stuff away. Also, Donald Trump, by the way, this is one for the internationalists in there, out there. He wants to actually bring in an Iron Dome system to America, similar to the one they've got in Israel. Now, obviously, the one in Israel works incredibly well and is very, very great to be to have and to operate. But the one they'd have to have in America would have to be giant, wouldn't it? How's he going to manage to do that? Let's find out in the coming moments and hours. James Heels are going to be talking to us from The Spectator in a little while. I'll ask him. Meanwhile, let's talk to Catherine Porter, who's an independent energy analyst. We've spoken to her a couple of times recently. Very sensible woman. Much more sensible than Ed Miliband, it has to be said. Catherine, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
We watched Ed Miliband a little bit earlier on. Let's watch him again. He now apparently thinks that he's going to collaborate with China to solve the climate crisis. Let's have a look.
In the absence of the US, if China takes on a more prominent role, what scope is there for constructive UK collaboration with China to achieve good climate outcomes for the UK?
I suppose the truth about this on China is there is no solution to the climate crisis without China, because they represent such a huge level of global emissions now. And, this is a point my US friends, Democrats and Republicans make. And so, of course, part of what we have to do as a UK government is work with China, among many other countries, to drive forward climate ambition.
Yes, so we're going to work with China now to drive forward climate ambitions. How's the old national grid going? Because I always like to check in with you on that, Catherine, because it's been pretty nasty. The storms have been blowing, the winds have been howling. Presumably gas has been on the upper edge of it.
It has, and what's interesting during the storms is that because wind turbines can't cope with wind speeds above about 45 miles an hour, they start to cut out. And so we've had days in the last week where the cut-off risk from wind has been about equivalent to a quarter of demand. Right. And if you could imagine that disappearing off the system in one go, the system wouldn't be able to cope. So the NESO has been having to actually shut down some wind farms deliberately, even when they weren't close to shutting off themselves, and running gas instead. And then also running gas in something that we call spinning reserve, which is basically running the gas power station and doing everything except actually generating electricity, so that if it's needed, it can synchronize to the grid really quickly, so it doesn't have to go through its ramping phase, which is normally 25 minutes. Right. But that's obviously a very expensive way of holding something in reserve. But it was necessary because these high wind speeds can literally cause these turbines to disappear from the grid instantaneously, and with the resulting loss of generation.
Absolutely. I mean, when I listen to you and when I look at the grid, as I do from time to time, people send me, the makeup of that day's energy quite a lot on social media. I can't really envisage a time when we don't have gas, because it's so important and it seems to be so well used and regularly used that I can't imagine it being replaced at all.
No, me neither, for that matter. I think that if we really reinvigorated our nuclear program, then we could get to a point where we more or less removed gas from the grid and replaced it with nuclear, much in the way that France is dominated by nuclear.
Yeah.
But this is a question for, the coming decades rather than the coming years.
Right. Well, I suppose on the one hand, it's good to see Ed Miliband at least recognising that China's emissions are quite large and, in fact, are not in any way, shape or form comparable to what we put out on a given year. But what do you make of his suggestion of working sort of hand in glove, if you like, with the Chinese?
Well, I mean, he's not hardly going to say otherwise. But the reality is that China is still building lots of coal power stations. Its environmental standards are very much lower than everybody else's across the board. China's the only country that produces rare earth metals at scale, and the reason for that is that this is such an environmentally toxic process. It's the only country on earth willing to pollute its own landscape to the degree that's necessary to do it.
Right.
And these are important components in wind turbines, ironically. So this is not likely to go anywhere. And what was interesting, I listened to that select committee yesterday. It's an hour and 45 minutes of my life I'm not getting back.
Goodness me, that is dedicated.
Yeah. Every time he was asked a question that was remotely difficult or pertinent, he just said, yeah, that's going to be really hard, without any real solutions to those challenges. He seems continually under the misapprehension that because we moved from coal to gas in the power sector, which had nothing whatsoever to do with climate goals, we were running out of coal at the same time that we discovered North Sea gas, which is why we made this switch. It was entirely incidental. But he thinks that because we happened to manage to grow the economy through that phase, that decarbonising isn't inconsistent with maintaining economic growth. All the evidence from countries around the world suggests the opposite. When you decarbonise, you harm economic growth.
Yeah, well, that would seem to be the case even inside of the Labour Party itself and the Labour government, because Rachel Reeves now wants to do a third runway at Heathrow. It looks as though she might get Keir Starmer's backing. It looks as though Ed Miliband's becoming more and more isolated politically. I know this is not necessarily your sort of focus on what it is that he's doing. But the government have clearly worked out what you've just said, which is that you can't, the two things are incompatible. They've made this mealy-mouthed suggestion that if they do get a third runway at Heathrow, they're going to somehow use cleaner fuel, even though they're not actually committing to manufacturing cleaner fuel up in Grangemouth, where they're actually just shutting the place down.
No, exactly. And he was asked questions about offshoring, and he went, yeah, that's kind of a bad thing, without any real solutions to it. I think, though, he's going to find himself with a kind of get-out-of-jail-free card here, because he was pretty insistent that any runway expansions would have to be compatible with the frameworks under the carbon budget. I've seen some stuff recently that suggests that a third runway at Heathrow could actually cut emissions, because you'd be able to fly directly to destinations in Asia where currently you can't fly directly, and those direct flights would actually have lower emissions than the connecting flights that have to happen now.
Yeah.
So I think you might find that he does some jiggery-pokery to actually somehow determine that this is all consistent with the carbon budgets, and nobody's being hypocritical.
Yeah, but unfortunately, the rest of us who live in the real world know that that's complete and utter bunkum. And you can maybe bamboozle a committee or a cabinet meeting with that sort of rubbish, but you can't actually tell it to ordinary people with brains. It's like when Rachel Reeves said, the planes won't be flying round and round in London above the city, so the air will be cleaner. As soon as I spoke to somebody like Simon Calder, who knows about the airline industry, he says, well, if you expand Heathrow, the airlines will just fly more planes in and out, which will mean there will still be just as much congestion as there ever was. There'll just be more of it.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's why I was saying it's smoke and mirrors. But I suspect that will be his kind of get-out-of-jail-free card.
Yeah, well, it's not working for me. I don't think he's going to be here in a year's time, but there we are. Catherine, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Catherine Porter, independent energy analyst, talks an awful lot of sense, does Catherine. Very glad that we discovered her just a few weeks ago. Let's go to the phones and get some of your views, because this is the home of common sense. After all, Vicky is in Oxford. She's got some news for us on Oxford City Council. Vicky, very good morning to you.
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Brilliant show.
Thank you.
I'm on my way to navigate the roads in Oxford.
Good luck.
I happened, yeah, exactly. I happened to phone Oxford City Council the other day with a sort of a landlord question.
Yeah.
And I got through to. I couldn't believe it. I actually thought it was a crossed wire. It said if you were a council tenant or a private tenant, you could sign up to a portal and you could win. You could be entered into a competition by the 31st of January to win the first prize of £500.
Right.
And other subsequent prizes totaling about £1,300. Who is paying for this?
Right. I mean, it might be that they've got. I mean, it could be. I only say this because I know that newspapers do it sometimes. It could be they've got a paying phone line, which means that whenever you phone the council, you're paying so much money to them that they can make it into a thing. But if it's an online thing, I don't see how they could be doing that.
Well, I rang the main council tax number, and that's what they advised, that if you signed up to the portal, that you could be entered into a competition.
Yeah.
So I don't think it was a phone line. But
No.
it's just it's incredible, really.
Yeah, I mean, unbelievably profligate with everybody else's money. Incredible stuff. Thank you very much indeed for letting us know. Vicky there, you might have some similar story, and maybe you can explain what it is and who's paying for it. Maybe they just want people to sign up to the portal, therefore they're giving them an incentive to do so. Andy in Cleethorpes says, morning, Mike. Wouldn't it be fantastic if, like in the film starring Jim Carrey, Keir Starmer had to tell the truth for a full 24 hours? God, would we learn something about the Labour Party? Keep up the good work. Yeah, that's liar, liar, isn't it? Bill in Cheshire says, on warship names, the French don't name their ships after their victorious battles because they've never won any. Well, that's what I was saying. I couldn't think of one that they'd won. Bobby says, Mike, I got caught up in a climate protest. When I asked them, does it mean Britain would get a more Caribbean climate with parrots and flamingos, because I would quite like that, the woman had a meltdown. It was rather funny. Yeah, they don't like you taking the mickey out of them. They don't like you saying things that might be considered to be too amusing, because it's a terribly serious subject, don't you know? Everybody's really, really bothered by the fact that, you know, their children are not going to be able to live. Their children are not going to be able to eat food. There's not going to be any possible place on the climate where you can live without dying from heat exhaustion. It's absolutely bonkers. James Hill's coming up next from The Spectator. We'll get lots out of him. This is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. 2 minutes past 8. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until, of course, 10 o'clock. And when Julie Hartley-Brewer is here just before that to tell us what's coming up on her show, we've got a great many things to discuss this morning. The front page of the Times today, alert from the Home Office over a dizzying range of extremism, according to a report that's been commissioned by Dan Jarvis, the Security Minister, and Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary. They say they don't actually like the report. They say they don't want to implement any of it. However, the Home Office have apparently put all this together with their great expertise because they want to steer everybody away from the worries about Islam, and they want everybody to stop worrying about Islamic terrorism, and they want everybody instead to think about basically opportunists from the right wing who are using exploitative and topical issues to completely change the narrative and make people think, for example, that there is alleged group-based sexual abuse going on. That would be the Pakistani rape gangs. Also, they would say they use words like two-tier policing to sound as though there's something going wrong with the police force in this country, which, of course, there is. So apparently if you say two-tier policing, you're some kind of right-wing extremist, according to the Home Office. Absolutely and utterly ridiculous. We're also going to be talking today about China's cheap AI chatbot, which has wiped billions off Silicon Valley shares. That happened overnight in the United States. The Chinese have launched something called DeepSeek, which was developed for a cost of about £6 million, I should say, as opposed to practically £1 billion, which is what all of the big tech companies in America have been spending on AI. Donald Trump's not happy about it. Also, we'll be talking about the Attorney General. The calls for him to step down have increased this morning after he's admitted that, yes, he does have some conflicts of interest with the government. Front page of the Sun, slightly different. They've got an exclusive with the Coke shame ref. That would be David Coote, who you might remember was sacked for getting himself involved in some Coke snorting, and also some slagging off of Liverpool fans and Jurgen Klopp. He says on the front page of the Sun, I was too scared to come out as gay, and that's why I decided to do a load of drugs and start insulting lots of people. Brilliant. 0344 499 1000 is the number. If you want to just remind yourself of who's running the country, have a listen to this.
Those
are all cabinet ministers, by the way, genuinely quoted by us over the course of the last few weeks. Basically, as well, we're going to be talking about Trump. Donald Trump, apparently, his latest ambitious scheme is to create an Iron Dome, similar to the one they have in Israel, to stop all the missiles from coming in when they get fired in from Gaza, from Lebanon and from Iran. He wants to build an entire Iron Dome protection system for the United States of America. Talk about ambition, eh? James Hill from the Spectator's coming up. We'll ask him about that. This is Morning Glory. Let's get it on. I should say, at 5 minutes past 8, that is a special birthday in our family today, and it's not any of my children, actually. It's somebody who is much less trouble and much more alluring, I suppose you might say. It is Ziggy, the dog, who's going to be 11 today. And there he is. There's a little picture of him. So very happy birthday, Ziggy. I won't be able to walk you, I'm afraid, today because I'm not down there. But it's probably raining and pouring and it's probably horrible. But he's getting a steak for his birthday, so I think he'll be very happy about that. Don't tell Dale Vince, whatever you do. Let's talk to James Hill, political correspondent of The Spectator. James, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
Good to talk to you. This non-crime hate business doesn't seem to want to go away, does it? We've got the Telegraph reporting today on this Home Office review that not only are you a right-wing extremist, I could be one as well. My dog might even be one, to be honest. But basically, they also would like to see more non-crime hate incidents recorded, even though the last government said they should be done away with altogether.
I mean, this is extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, if everyone's an extremist, what's the mainstream? Look, I think that this shows just how unresponsive a lot of police forces really are. And looking at some of the comments that have been reported in the Telegraph today, it's extraordinary, suggesting that, you know, talking about grooming gangs is a right-wing conspiracy theory. Trying to disparage critics. And it just shows, I think, the police are at its worst with their head firmly buried in the sand.
They really are. And I mean, some of the language used really gives away the mentality inside of the Home Office. And while it looks as though Yvette Cooper has had a reasonably sensible sort of reaction to this, and she doesn't want to implement any of these measures, it tells you that the people working inside of the Home Office have got a very strange view of the world.
Yeah, and obviously I think that, the Home Office was always regarded, even by the last government, as the exceptional department. I mean, most people I spoke to in the sort of Conservative Party who were working in government departments always would say that the departments worked very well. There wasn't so much a blob, but the one exception was the Home Office. The Home Office was very much a law unto itself.
Yeah.
And I think that this shows very much that the department has a real culture change it needs to learn. And I think that it's being responsive to public pressures, because non-crime hate incidents have repeatedly been criticised, as you say there. Right. They've repeatedly come under scrutiny. And with the Alison Pierce case, they're clearly indefensible. And yet that's exactly what this report does, and there's no wonder the government's running a million miles from it.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, but I mean, thank goodness, it means they're learning something since they've been in. But how about this, though? Right-wing extremists frequently exploit cases of alleged group-based sexual abuse. This is a quote, to promote anti-Muslim sentiment, as well as related anti-government and anti-political correctness narratives. They're actually using the word alleged about rape gangs. There's nothing alleged about them, is there?
No, completely not. And it shows, I think, a misplacement of priorities if you're more concerned about policing language than actually trying to get serious and trying to clamp down on these issues. I think that the reaction of a lot of people to the grooming gangs inquiry over the past 4 weeks or so has shown that they've got their priorities mixed up and are going to be, I think, unable to learn the lessons of the last few months, which have been that there is no longer the same policing of language that goes on. Yeah. I think that there's going to be a more need for a serious push at this. And as you say, I mean, I'm fascinated to see if the government adopts Islamophobia as official government definition, because I think that will be a whole basket of issues they want to open up.
Well, this is a big problem, isn't it? Because I was talking earlier in the show about this problem with Dr. Paul Stott, because Keir Starmer got himself into all kinds of sort of, torturous wriggle room scenarios when he started trying to define the word terrorism. And it seems to me that part of the problem here is the definition of these words. And he was able to sort of hide behind the fact that, the Southport killer was not determined to be a terrorist because he didn't fit the actual description of one, which seems mad to me. It's a bit like, if they start describing right-wing extremists as people who don't agree with them, then they're going to have an awful lot of right-wing extremists to deal with. They seem to have invented a word called manosphere, which is apparently where you and I probably inhabit, a space which involves an interest in extreme misogyny, gore, and online subcultures and obsessions. I mean, do they not have anything better to do?
Well, I think this is the issue when it comes to following process at the expense of outcome, which is that, as you say, if it's a technical definition, I mean, that seems very much a misplacement of priorities again. And also, let's face it, with Axel Ruda Cabana, it doesn't matter what he was clearly a threat. This man was exhibiting a dangerous pattern of behaviour, and it doesn't matter that he wasn't particularly into ideology. As you say, he had some pretty sick interests. He was someone who was asking his teachers about massacres, etc., age 13, 14, and Prevent should have stopped it because there were 3 times they was referred to it. So I'm less fussed about sort of definitions. I just don't want them to trip up kind of investigations that go on.
No, I agree with you. I think definitions are the purview of lawyers. I mean, part of the problem with a lot of the governments that we've had lately is there's too many bleeding lawyers in there, and they want to try and be specific. It's like they're looking for a definition of Islamophobia, and if it falls outside of that, then it's not Islamophobia. Similarly, if you're a right-wing extremist, it has to fit this little, sort of fence line that they've set up deliberately so that you've inadvertently stepped over it and become a criminal.
Absolutely, and I think that that's going to be a huge amount of paperwork, isn't it? And actually, is that about the public sector delivery that people voted for a Labour government for in July? I don't think it is. No. And I think they should be very careful, given all the reviews they've commissioned, one every 2.5 days or so. Yeah,
absolutely right. A couple of other things to catch up on in the Telegraph. We've got Wes Streeting now giving up on some targets that he was going to try and hit for women's health. The NHS just sort of leaps from bad to worse, doesn't it? You've got not enough doctors, not enough nurses, not enough ambulances, not enough treatments being held. We've got another crisis going on. I mean, Wes Streeting's gone quite quiet, hasn't he, about all of the things that he wanted to do, because all of them have all been sort of shoved to the background.
Well, I'm fascinated by the latest attack on Nigel Farage, which is that he has a miserablest view of Britain.
Yeah.
This is the health secretary who can't do an interview without saying how broken the NHS is. So not exactly sure how that all stacks up. But as you say, getting into office, I'm just delighted that, if they're canning the women's health strategy, they presumably can now define what a woman is.
Well, that would be helpful, wouldn't it? Maybe they can change some of the documentation that's been produced by various health trusts around the country. But yeah, I mean, there's an awful lot of things that seem to be kind of just going round and round and round. I mean, we were talking about Ed Miliband just before the news there. He seems to be more and more isolated from the rest of the government. All these conversations about expanding Heathrow, putting in a third runway, how growth and net zero are not two issues that can run side by side. It's either one or the other. He's sounding more and more kind of detached from government, almost though he's not part of it.
Well, I think that really what it's shown this Heathrow expansion is the two kind of elements of Keir Starmer's leadership coming up against each other. Of course, when he ran for leader, he very much ran as a green leftist. He was hailing the fact that the Heathrow expansion was blocked in February 2020. And then, of course, from about 2022 onwards, he's suddenly saying, no, I'm much more about economic growth. I'm much more on the Rachel Reeves camp. And these two figures, Miliband and Reeves, have really clashed in the two big cabinet battles of the past year. The first was, of course, about the 28 billion figure. That was scrapped, so Reeves won that. And the second was another one Reeves won, which was winter fuel. Miliband led the cabinet resistance against that. And now we've got a third issue, which is about carbon budgets versus, ordinary pocketbooks. I suspect Reeves will win this one again, but again, it does leave the question about how many votes is Ed Miliband going to win the Labour Party and how many is he going to cost next time around.
Right. And the other guy who's kind of still under fire a bit is Lord Hermer, isn't he, the Attorney General? He's come out and admitted, basically, that he has conflicts of interest, that he has had to recuse himself from giving advice to the government in certain situations. Well, surely that makes him unfit for purpose as an Attorney General, doesn't it?
Well, I think it all depends on how he implements his policy, doesn't it? And in terms of are we going to see those vested interests manifest themselves on government decision-making? I do think it shows perhaps the danger of appointing someone who's never been in Parliament before. Lord Hermer, first Attorney General in more than 100 years to have never sat in either House of Parliament. And I think that it says something that what was previously one of the government's supposed strengths, it's important, talking on about rights a lot, etc., is now turning into a perceived weakness. And you see that with the election of Trump, the Chagos Islands, etc., and of course the bizarre decision to go along with the International Criminal Court's ruling in Israel. All of those have real world consequences. So I think that Lord Hermer's already irritating some of his Labour colleagues in government.
Well, he is, and in fact, the reason I suppose I said what I said is that, if you're an Attorney General, i.e. supposedly an advisor to the Prime Minister on legal matters and other things, if you can't advise him on those things because of your previous history with various clients who all seem to have had some gripe with Great Britain, whether it's Shamima Begum or Jerry Adams or some dodgy asylum seekers coming from Sri Lanka via the Chagos Islands into Britain. It surely means that if you can't do that job of advising, then there's not much point in having you.
And also if you actually got the practical experience. And because I think that the danger is with the Attorney General, my understanding is that he sees himself more as the kind of lawyer's voice in these different departments rather than vice versa. He's supposed to be arguing the case for getting round some of the judicial review obstacles that have been put in place over many years. And so, as you say, whether it's about whether he's compromised or whether he's just not going to be efficient, I'm curious to see whether or not he does last the full 5 years.
Yeah, I don't think he will. I'm not sure he's going to last this year, actually, because, I'm quite good at predicting. We haven't had a resignation from the cabinet for a couple of weeks. So come on, surely we can speed things up a little bit. We had Tulip Sadiq, who might be facing extradition, by the way. Apparently, Bangladeshis want to bring her over there to ask her a few questions about matters pertaining to the house that she was living in London.
Well, Mike, we're a rule-based system, as Lord Hermer would say. So. First flight out there.
Absolutely right. Brilliant. James Hill, thank you very much indeed. Political correspondent at The Spectator. Let's get a voice note from Sean.
Morning, Mike. Sean from Grimsby here. Got a question for these eco-zealots like idiot Miliband. Why is digging up oil and gas bad, yet digging up cobalt, nickel and lithium for all the electric cars is good? Seems a bit funny, that, don't you think? Great show, mate.
Very good question, Sean. Yes, it's an absolutely spot-on question. We'll have to ask somebody that next time we get them on. Jason in Market Deeping, don't know where that is, says, we talk a lot about how this current government has lied to us leading up to the election and now are doing very little as to what they promised. What we don't seem to speak a lot about is how we have got a system that allows this to happen. How can the people who are supposed to be holding the highest office in the land be allowed to say one thing and then do completely the opposite? Surely it's the system that needs addressing before we start to see any real change in politics. Have a great day. Jason, very thoughtful message. I agree with you. I was saying this to our guest earlier, who was on, Theo Usherwood, and we were like saying to him, well, hang on a minute, what exactly is going on in the minds of the political advisors in this country? Are you saying to people like Keir Starmer, just say whatever you like, just say, look, don't worry about it, the council tax is not going up, not a penny more will you pay under Labour, and then when we do put the council taxes up, we'll just say, well, that's nothing to do with us. I don't know why that happened. Of course, prices have to go up from time to time, and just sort of ignore the fact that you've made a very strong statement saying that it wasn't going to happen. I think it's absolutely incredible that that is now accepted behaviour in our political system. It shouldn't be. Coming up, Trevor Phillips is going to join us. He's got a column in The Sun today about the whole situation surrounding the Southport killer, who we try our best not to name on this show. I'm going to mention that to him as well, because what on earth has gone wrong with the system in this country? We've got the Home Office talking about right-wing extremism. We've got Prevent having a young man referred to them 3 times and them thinking he's not dangerous. He then goes on a killing spree, the like of which we've hardly ever seen in this country. It's so barbaric and brutal. Trevor Phillips coming next.
Not right. I've got to act here. And so often it might be some action that somebody does that gives you cause for suspicion. You stop them, you want to search them. You know, police need to be supported in doing this. We are talking about young people losing their lives. So we need support from the sergeants, the inspectors, all the way up through to the commissioner. They need to support their staff. They need to get them out there doing this, because this will get knives off the street and save young lives.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 21 minutes past 8. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock, of course. We've got a great many things going on, including this Home Office review, which has come out. It's on the front page of the Times and the Telegraph, talking about the preponderance of worries that they seem to have inside the Home Office about right-wing extremism, which takes us on to another kind of form, I suppose, of extremism. Trevor Phillips joins me now, of course, Sun columnist today, but a broadcaster, a journalist of some renown. Trevor, very good to see you. Welcome to to the show. Great piece in the paper today on page 12 of The Sun. How 3 little girls paid a terrible price for someone's failure to tell between the dotty and the truly dangerous. I mean, it seems to me, and I don't know if you agree with this, that up until the moment that this man, whose name I try not to use only because I don't want to give him any credence for what he did, was reported to prevent, the system seemed to work. You know, there were people in schools who said there's something wrong here. His parents had a problem with it. It was when he got to prevent that when it started to kind of unravel and not really see what was going on.
Good morning, Mike, and slightly disconcerted that when you said you returned to another form of extremism. Let's talk to Trevor Phillips.
Sorry.
on this particular case of this killer, and I'll respect your rules, let's just refer to him as the killer. You're partly right to say that the system works in the sense that there was a system available. The problem was it wasn't used in, I think, the right way, and the choices that were made by police, by educational authorities, were essentially the wrong ones. And the story that you've been covering earlier on, which is the policy exchange report on the Home Office document, I think relates here. The point of that document is it says that essentially, that report, sorry, it says that essentially inside the Home Office, there is a concerted effort by some civil servants to reduce the importance of Islamism by essentially making it equal to all sorts of other things, including misogyny or the sort of anti-Tate unpleasantness or something like that, which we know doesn't really lead to the kind of focused and organized violence that we think about when we think about Islamism. And secondly, in the case of the killer, and what I've written about today, is that in the PREVENT program, that kind of imperative, that kind of impulse existed. And what they did in 2019-20 was to introduce a new category of terrorism, which they called no ideology.
Right.
Because the referrals and prevent from police and so on were categorized by whether Islamism or right-wing terrorism or whatever. What actually then happened was the 2/3 of the referrals, which were Islamism, suddenly became no ideology. And attached to no ideology is no risk, and in practice, no action. So this impulse, which is described in the policy exchange report, which is to play down Islamism, actually ended up with a result in which somebody who could have been picked up by the system was ignored.
Yeah.
And that's the problem here. This is not abstract. This is not a sort of talking point. This ends up with 3 little girls dead and 23 other children and their teacher terrorized pretty much for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, exactly right. And so it's a much bigger issue, really, isn't it, than just simply political correctness, because people's lives have been affected by this, people's lives have been ended by this. And I think also the fact that PREVENT is a sort of a voluntary organisation, that you don't really have to have any dealings with them if you choose not to, as a troubled teenager or whatever it is, or an older person. It seems remarkable to me that that's the sort of terms of reference.
Indeed. And, you know, what you said, Mike, just now is extremely important. You know, we can take all sorts of risks in our lives about people we meet. You know, we meet somebody and we think, oh, well, maybe they might be a friend, maybe they're not. Anyway, you meet them 2 or 3 times, you realize that it's not going to work out. Not much lost, nothing ventured, etc.
Right.
If you have to make a judgment about whether somebody is likely to commit an act of terrorist judgment, you cannot take it that lightly.
No.
It has to be taken seriously. It's got to be investigated properly. And the pressures within the official system right now are to take certain kinds of suspicions less likely. And the reason for that is very simple. Nobody wants to be called a racist or anti-Muslim. So what happens is, if you start to expand the definition of racist, or expand the definition of who is anti-Muslim based on a statement that they might make, which frankly might not a statement that you and I might not agree with, but is perfectly legitimate in this country. This is a country of free speech. Then what happens is people who have to make those critical judgments about whether somebody is a danger or not start to back off, because what they worry is if they say investigate this one because I'm worried about this person being a perpetrator of Islamist violence, what then happens is the spotlight doesn't turn on that individual, it turns on you, because you then get accused of being prejudiced.
Right.
That's our problem.
And that needs to be fixed. And how do you fix that problem, though?
Well, I think, first of all, it's got to come from the top. And the government and ministers have to make absolutely clear that what the security services say, which is that 3/4 of the terrorist threat that they investigate are Islamist threats. They are not right-wing threats. But there is a kind of orthodoxy that's developing within official circles that actually the right-wing threat is as big as the Islamist threat. And that's why all of this is happening, to try to equalize these things. So the first thing the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary have to do is to remind everyone where the real threat comes from. Secondly, they have to impose some discipline on their officials. This is, you don't get to be a civil servant and then follow your own policy.
Right.
You have to follow the facts and government policy. And I think those two things would make a big start in changing the situation.
Right. The other really important point that you make, and I've been talking about this as well, is some of the discoveries that you made when you were actually asked by Gordon Brown to investigate a series of stabbings in London and why it was involving so many young black men. And you found out that many of them had come from war zones in Africa, like Ethiopia, like Somalia, like Congo, because a lot of the description of what happened in Southport was that the level of violence was just almost unprecedented. And you make the point, and I think this happened after the Balkans War as well, when we had an awful lot of people in Western Europe from places like Albania and Kosovo and Bosnia, that people who have been in those kind of conflict areas have a different approach to violence, have a different view of it, and a different kind of experience of it.
Yes, and look, let me be absolutely clear about this. I'm sure that there will be people listening and people who read what I've written in the Times yesterday and the Sun today, and will take this as a reason to go, oh, well, we've got to keep them all out. Well, that's not my point at all.
Yeah.
My point is a very simple one. We are a country that has played a great role from over centuries in giving haven to people who have fled conflict and persecution. And I think that is the right thing to do. It continues to be the right thing to do. It is part of being who we are. But we have to recognize that this comes with some potential costs and risks. And what I discovered in 2007, because there was a spate of knife crime, was that a lot of the young men, and it's all young men pretty much, young men who were involved, mostly black, had come from African war zones. And what did we do when they arrived? Of course, we welcomed them. Then we plonked them in school. And these kids had seen terrible things. They'd seen murders, they'd seen maimings, they'd seen rape of their relatives in front of their eyes. And we just plonked them in school, didn't give them any help, any treatment, any support. And I think we're beginning to see right now actually the consequences of that, because those children are now in their 20s. And if you go to the Old Bailey, the lawyers there will tell you that every day the cells below the court, which are full of homicide suspects on trial, 75% of them are black, and very many of them are from this background.
Yeah.
My point is that we shouldn't make the same mistake twice. We need to make sure that we identify these young men and that we give them the kind of support and treatment that will help them deal with their demons. Otherwise, what happens is it comes out in different ways.
Well, right.
And I think we'll probably see as the story of what we're calling the killer emerging, that the background that his parents came from, Rwanda, they were Tutsis who were the victims of essentially a genocide, that background will figure pretty heavily in his psychology.
Yeah, I think so. Good to talk to you, Trevor. Thanks very much indeed. Trevor Phillips, Sun columnist today, writing about the Southport killer and how we have to be so careful now about how we treat these cases because you can't afford to have any more of them happening. And as he said, an awful lot of the people who are coming to this country and who have been in this country for quite some time have seen horrible violence and have seen terrible things happen in their countries of origin. And you can't ignore that, which is why it's all the more important that we know who the people are who are coming here, surely. It's 8:32. Coming up, we're going to speak to Andrew Griffith MP, Shadow Business Secretary. Let's get a voice note first, though. A voice note, even, from Dan.
Morning, Mike, Lord of Common Sense. Dan from West Yorkshire here. If the government can't take money from extremist organisations, and I'm a far-right extremist for saying two-tier policing, will they not want my taxes? Sounds like a win to me. Have a great day, Mike.
Yes, they will also want more of your taxes. They'll probably start taxing you more for being a right-wing extremist. Exactly right. Peter says this: Mike, Mad Ed Minibrain is a perfect example of a politician that has been a failure and desperately wants to prove himself. Sadly, he's just proving what an idiot he is. I think so. And Sean says, morning, Mike. So Keith Stalin is lying again. No surprise, I suppose. Wouldn't it be revealing to see if he has told the truth on anything? That would be a challenge. How about this from Anna in Surrey? She says, do you think the wheelchair shoplifting lady is far right? Will Starmer make a statement later saying she's a danger to society? Well, he might well do. She certainly managed to escape the police at 5 miles an hour. Absolutely extraordinary stuff. There she goes. They couldn't catch her, not because she was going so quickly, but because they wouldn't get out of the car. Well, this is happening in Sheffield, as you look, by the way. They pull the car in front of her. She just goes round them. It's not exactly Bullet, is it? And I know that's maybe a car chase that maybe some of you don't remember, but they did remake it. But it's not much of a car chase. She's on an electric wheelchair, effectively, and the police have got their blue lights on, their sirens flashing, but they can't get out of the car and just run after her, where they would get her, because it would be absolutely easy, the easiest thing in the world to do. We'll try and find out what actually happened. This is Talk. It's 8:34.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's 8:36. We're here, of course, all the way through until 10 o'clock. Julie Hartley-Brewer will be here shortly before that to tell us what's coming up on her show. We've been talking a lot this morning about Keir Starmer and the council tax rises that are coming, some as high as 25% if you happen to live in Windsor. Some other councils going up 15%, others 10%, others 9%. You know, on top of all the other inflationary rises that are going on around people's private incomes. This is another one that's going to be too hard for them to bear. Let's talk to Andrew Griffith, MP, Shadow Business Secretary. He's down in Westminster, I think, for us. Andrew, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
Thanks very much indeed for joining us. I'm going to play you a little clip of our Prime Minister who said something that hasn't come true, funnily enough, back in April of this year. Have a look.
Labour would freeze council tax next year. Yes, you heard it right. Not a penny more on your council tax. Not a penny more than the bill you paid last year.
So, not a penny more, apparently. We're not going to pay any more council tax. Some places are going to be going up by 20%, 25%, 15%. How can he keep getting away with just saying things that are untrue?
Well, it's a very good question, Mike, and the Prime Minister should not be allowed to get away with time after time breaking promises, being exposed as effectively telling lies. This is a shower of a government, frankly. Every single one, as you go around the cabinet table, from foreign secretaries trying to give away our sovereign territory, a home secretary who said she'd stop the boats and had a plan, and they keep coming, and she cancelled the Rwanda deterrent. And in my beef and my area of business, you know, it's a government that day after day is piling on more red tape for business. They're all talking about growth this week, like their lives depend on it. Probably Rachel Reeves' job does depend on it. And yet, day after day in Parliament, they're pushing through more red tape on employers, more red tape on businesses. And of course, businesses are reeling from that terrible budget. You know, the jobs tax, the death tax on family businesses and farms, taxing people's pensions through inheritance tax for the first time. You know, I could keep going on, Mike, but you don't need any persuading from me just how terrible this government is. And I feel for your listeners and viewers who are right at the firing line of where the government is taking people's money and spending it on unreformed public services.
Yeah, it seems incredible as well, because Rachel Reeves is the same. I mean, she keeps telling us that, you know, she's drawn a line under the years of chaos fiscally in this country. I'm not sure that that's entirely true either, because the economy in June, before the election, was an awful lot healthier than it is now. You know, she's basically...
The only line she's drawing is the flat line, and that flat line is, you know, businesses bleeding out on our high streets day by day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I speak to business leaders all the time. I spoke to the boss of Brewdog, the brewing company, the other day, who said there's never been a worse time to start a business in the United Kingdom. And he's worried about the future more than he's ever been, he says. And many employers are now saying they've not only got to freeze new jobs, but they're going to have to lose people, particularly once April kicks in with the national insurance rises. People are really worried about how they're going to make a living.
Every one of the health metrics of the economy are now flashing red. Interest rates are starting to rise, inflation's up, the cost of living, and people's weekly shopping baskets, that cost is going up. And as you say, every day we're hearing from businesses who are saying, look, I just can't afford to hire with Labour's job tax and with the threat of employment legislation coming down. So this week, apparently, we're going to hear from Rachel Reeves talking about growth. Words are cheap, it's actions that matter. And although I welcome investment in infrastructure, a bigger airport for London, more homes, particularly in London, none of that is going to help if in the meantime we've got this massive brain drain as the best and brightest leave this country and our high streets are lying wasteland because of Labour's job taxes and all of the red tape they're putting on business.
Yeah, it is absolutely shocking. Andrew, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Andrew Griffith, MP, Shadow Business Secretary there. Got this from Lawson. Good morning, Mike. Maybe the government should concentrate on reducing the cost of the public sector before trying to take people's pensions away. It's scandalous that people may lose their state pension when they have relied upon it, means tested or not. Well, this is it. I mean, everybody is suffering right now under this government, unless you happen to be a public sector worker. in which case you're doing all right. Let's talk to Rupert Bell, though, who's Talk's royal correspondent, of course. Lots and lots of pictures this morning on the front pages of the papers. King Charles visiting Auschwitz for the first time. I think a royal has gone there. Also, the Princess of Wales was out in London yesterday commemorating Holocaust Memorial Day. Rupert, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
Good to see the royal family involved in all of this. A very poignant picture of the King on the front page of the Daily Mail, emotional, wiping away a tear. It's hard not to tear up when you see these kinds of things, but a commemoration, I suppose, that everybody can have some feeling for and can have some understanding of. Unusual to see the royal family getting involved.
Well, I think it shows, obviously, harking back to the Second World War and our role in it. And I think it's for the King, it was a very poignant trip yesterday. You could see, as you mentioned, wiping away the tears. And when you see just a cabinet full of children's shoes, it brings home the magnitude of the horror that was inflicted on the Jewish population during the Second World War. And obviously now, with it being 80 years, there are decreasing quite by the history of time of numbers of people who survived. I think there was a lady who was 5.5 years old at the time when she was released from Auschwitz. So it just, beggars belief what happened. But I suppose, as the King put it in his message, it is something that we have to remember can happen and shouldn't happen again. But even since Auschwitz, we know there have been horrible genocides, not only Rwanda as a case in point, and I've just come back from Cambodia, where 2 million out of 7 million population suffered at the hands of the Khmer Rouge. I actually met a survivor of 93 who was in one of those prisons. So, we can look back in history, but what it seems to suggest, we're not very good at learning from history, as there have been these horrible incidents even since Auschwitz 80 years ago. And I think that's the message the King was hoping to drive home. Look, we're never far away from something happening as horrendous as what happened in the Second World War again.
Totally. And a very important day for him, but also quite an important day for the royal family in general, to see both he and Princess of Wales out doing their sort of public duties, which we haven't seen a lot of recently.
Yeah, the Princess of Wales, accompanied by her husband, went to a service in London and meeting again survivors of the Holocaust in the Second World War again. And she has met them over preceding years as well. So it was very much a meeting of former friends in many ways. But it was, again, just bringing home the focus. And obviously, currently with what's going on in the Middle East and the focus and people talking of the rise of anti-Semitism, it brings home all what's going on at the moment in very stark reality of what horrible things man can do unto man, and those in scenes, and even now that pile of shoes that you see, it just brings it home of how horrendous what happened in the Second World War was.
Absolutely. Rupert, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Talk's royal correspondent there on King Charles at Auschwitz, and also the Princess of Wales at a candlelit ceremony in London commemorating Holocaust Memorial Day. Coming up next, Greg Swenson's going to join us. He's chair of Republicans Overseas. He's here in the studio. He's going to talk to us about Donald Trump and how he's doing. Believe it or not, he's only been in for a week. So much has happened. He's changed so much in the world already. And there's a bit of a backlash on the migrant front. We'll bring you that next.
sadly increasing irrelevance, not just of our wonderful country on the world stage, but of Western Europe in general, the French as well, the Germans, the Spanish, the Italians are starting to do a bit of a comeback that maybe we could all follow, but that is very upsetting. And maybe Trump has decided, as you say, let's be nice to Starmer, kill him with a bit of kindness, to try and encourage Starmer to change course on the many, many areas in which he's gone completely wrong. And let's remember that Trump is himself half British. His mother was born in Scotland. Yep. He loves the United Kingdom more than any president ever has.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 8:48. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. Of course, we're almost into the final hour of the show. Stuart says this, Mike, council worker benefits not only include gold-plated pensions and now good salaries, but also 8 weeks holiday, a 34-hour week, and working from home to look after children, go to the gym, go shopping and meet friends. Nice work if you can get it, I suppose, although there's a piece in the papers today saying working from home is actually bad for your health. We've got Greg Swenson here with us, the chair of Republicans Overseas. Greg, very good morning to you. Great to see you, Mike. We'll come to you in 1 second. I just want to play a quick voice note from Joanne on migration.
Morning, Mike. Joanne from Norfolk. So I listened to Trevor Phillips and obviously he made some very good points. We do not have the money or the capacity to deal with our own issues for people with mental health problems in this country. We certainly don't have it to deal with people who arguably, if they don't get seen, will then go around rampaging on the streets, killing our children. I'm sorry, there must be another way where we can support these people being moved to countries like, or better countries in Africa, and then help with funding for medical support so they can get the treatment they need there and hopefully go back to the countries they've come from and rebuild them when they're ready. This wholesale import of other people's problems will just break this country if it hasn't done already. Great show. Thanks, Mike.
Joanne, thanks very much indeed. Well said. Interesting that we should be talking about migration and immigration because, Greg, you know, that's been the big story, hasn't it? I mean, it's hard to believe Donald Trump's been in a week. I mean, I was just talking to Alicia there. I was like, we're just going to have a look at, you know, Donald Trump's first week. Seems like he's been in for ages. Yeah, he's only been here for like 7 days.
8 days. I mean, he's really hit the ground running. Yeah. It's fantastic to see.
And the business with Colombia was classic Trump, wasn't it? You know, suddenly, you know, it was Sunday afternoon, you see this flashing story comes up, Colombia president refusing to take migrants who are being sent back by Donald Trump, turning the planes around. I thought Trump was going to declare war on him, you know, but in fact he just went, nah, we'll say what, we'll just put a load of tariffs on you and we'll take away some of your financial aid, and suddenly within, what, 45 minutes?
30 minutes from start to finish. He's on a golf course. He pulls the nuclear option calmly. And just said, you know, 25%, you know, tariffs going up to 50, travel ban on all you idiots, sanctions, enhanced inspections at the border, and international banking sanctions. So, you know, 30 minutes later, the guy's kissing his ring. It's beautiful.
And sending his own plane to say, actually, I'll bring some more of these characters out, who are all, by the way, criminals.
Absolutely.
Right? These are not, you know, innocent Colombians.
And what he said, the socialist that he is Trump can't treat Colombian migrants as criminals. Well, actually, he can, because they're criminals.
Because they are criminals. Yeah. But, of course, not everybody agrees with the policy. We're going to play a little clip here from an actress by the name of Selena Gomez, who's not happy.
I just wanted to say that I'm so sorry. How many people are getting attacked? The children. I don't understand. I'm so sorry. I wish I could do something, but I can't. I don't know what to do. I'll try everything, I promise.
Yeah, I could give you a couple of ideas of what to do. You know, like, don't film yourself crying about criminals being deported from the country you live in.
Mary Ellen saw it on Instagram this morning and played it 3 times. She was laughing all morning.
I know.
It was a great
it's
way
just
to
ridiculous.
wake up.
Typical Hollywood reaction. Let's have a look at Tom Homan, though, who's in charge of immigration, and his response to it.
The Hollywood celebrity who posted it has now deleted it, I think because probably she faced a lot of backlash for it, noting even the New York Times and Fox News polls show that a majority of American respondents are in favor of deportations of criminals and gang members. She posted a video sobbing. She was crying in it. She said, "All my people are getting attacked," with the picture of a Mexican flag. Again, she has now taken that down. But what do you say to those who are out there saying that these are everyday people, these are families that are being attacked and dragged out of their homes? How do you respond to that?
I don't think we arrested any families. We've arrested public safety threats and national security threats, bottom line. And look, President Trump won the election on this one issue, securing our border and saving lives.
And he's right, because these are basically criminals that are being deported. 750,000, I think, was the number that was given by Donald Trump on Inauguration Day.
Yeah.
So he's got plenty more to do.
And that's a big number. I'm not sure they even have the capacity to do that, but so far so good. And they are targeting criminals. And, you know, there was one of the criminals that was deported to Colombia had killed a 19-year-old woman.
Yeah.
So you can have, you know, AOC and the rest of them whining about higher coffee prices, which never happened because he backed down. But, you know, I think consumers would rather pay 50 cents more at Starbucks and have fewer rapists and murderers in the country. So
if only we could do the same, because when we try and deport people, all we get is the Human Rights Brigade going, "Oh, but he's got a right to a family life. He's got a cat that he likes, and he's got, you know,
and we get that in America
transgender
too.
child." You know, it's unbelievable. Now, the internet being what it is, of course, we've also got a bit of a parody of Selena Gomez for you. Have a look at this.
Guys, I'm sorry, but all my people are getting attacked. All of the innocent rapists and murderers and criminals and drug dealers are getting rounded up and just kicked out of this country like they're objects. I'm sorry.
I mean, she's never going to live this down, is she?
No, I think it might be the end of her. It'd be a shame. I don't even know who she is. But it really is amusing to see the radical progressive left freaking out.
Yeah.
You know, 9 senators, I won't name them because it won't mean anything here, but 9 senators voted against the Laken Riley Act, which was named after the nursing student who was killed by an illegal migrant criminal, Venezuelan. And they basically the law is that illegal migrants who commit crimes, even lower, not even, you know, homicide, but even lesser crimes, will be deported.
Yeah.
And it was named after Laken Riley quite deliberately. 9 senators and a bunch of congressmen voted against it.
And so many of them as well at the time were saying, well, this is going to be very difficult, he won't be able to do it. But he's doing it.
Oh, yeah.
You know, there are people getting put on planes, the planes are taking off, and they're landing in the countries they came from.
Is it expensive? Sure. But not as expensive as housing migrants in hotels and giving them debit cards and mobile phones.
Our situation,
and food.
I mean, this is why I'm hoping that if Keir Starmer's got any brains about him, he will see that it can be done. And you can actually remove people and take them back from whence they came. You know, and we should be able to take a lead from Donald Trump. Whether we will or not is another matter. But you know, we don't perhaps have the power that America has. But nevertheless,
but it's a shame because I think it would be good for the country. But it would actually be good for the Labour government.
Yeah, it would.
You know,
it would be very good for the country. We would save
a little bit,
and we would save an awful lot of money. They finally had a conversation. There was a lot of talk last week that Donald Trump was kind of toying with Keir Starmer. I think he was. And he didn't call him straight away deliberately, I believe. But he finally called him on Sunday. They supposedly had a 45-minute chat, but somebody said to me about 40 minutes of that he was on hold. You know, so I don't know if they had a 45-minute chat.
It's funny. Yeah, look, I think President Trump really likes the United Kingdom. And so he'll reach out in spite of Keir Starmer and the politics.
He loves the royal family, doesn't he?
Absolutely. You know, he chatted with Prince William in Paris. And he's reached out before. So I think, you know, great relationship with King Charles. I think the president wants to do business with the UK. He wants to keep that relationship in spite of the, you know, political opposition or differences.
And the things that have been said by almost all members of the Labour cabinet, which have been
doesn't help.
It doesn't help.
I don't think it's you know, it will be permanent or debilitating. It doesn't help, but I think he'll get
through it. Yeah. Well, I mean, he's proving himself to be a very seasoned politician now, isn't he, Donald Trump? I mean, he's a very different guy than the guy who got in 2016.
Without a doubt, without a doubt.
And so when do you think there'll be a meeting of the two then? Because obviously the state visit, if it comes, will be much later in the year, if not next year. If there's a Trump-Starmer little summit somewhere in Washington, D.C., or maybe down at Mar-a-Lago, could it be? What's his kind of schedule look like?
He's totally jammed right now. You know, with the executive orders, as I said, he really hit the ground running. It's great to see. Now comes the hard part. It's working with Congress to get bills passed, and especially the tax cuts extended. They're due to expire at the end of the year. That would be catastrophic for the economy, catastrophic for the world, quite frankly. So that's going to be tough with the slim majority they have. So that's I think the hard work starts now.
Yeah, okay. And the big story overnight as well is this China DeepSeek situation, where something like $1 trillion has been wiped off the stock market. Nvidia, which I'd never heard of before, lost $550 billion. I'm sure you'll know more about this than me. It was the world's most valuable public company. It isn't anymore. They've created this AI chatbot effectively for $6 million, compared to something like anything between 100 million and $1 billion in the States.
I think many of those companies were due for a slight correction. You know, I don't believe anything that comes out of China, first of all, and secondly, Nvidia was up tenfold in the last 2 years. So a 14% drop is not that big a deal when you're up 1,000%.
Sure. So it's still doing okay, in other words.
I think it was a little overdone yesterday, a little bit of panic in the market. I think it's just a sign of long-term investment.
The other question, of course, is if you're going to use AI, do you want to use AI coming from a country which is not entirely truthful about what's being fed into that AI machine?
Exactly.
You know?
I'm very suspicious about all that, all the news yesterday. And you're going to see continued investment in the sector. You know, Microsoft's building Facebook, I think, or Microsoft, forget, is building an $80 billion data center. You know, this half the size of Manhattan. It's
incredible.
Crazy.
It is. They'll need a lot of electricity for that. Don't call Ed Miliband. It would be my advice. Greg, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Greg Swenson, Chair of Republicans Overseas. It's going pretty well for Donald Trump. Not going quite so well for Keir Starmer. We'll tell you why coming up in the next hour. John Rentoul is here, though. I don't know what he's going to have a row with me about this week, but we shall see. Whatever it is, it won't be a story. This is Morning Glory.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 2 minutes past 9. It's at this time of the day that I always go, how did we get here? We're into the final hour of the show already. We've been here since 6 a.m. The weather's looking a little bit brighter. It's still a bit misty, but there's a lot of storm action going on out there. So if you're trying to get anywhere, you might just want to be a bit careful. Some of the roads around Britain are flooded. Some of the trains are not running. It's a usual kind of, Tuesday feeling, I suppose. But we are feeling very confident here at Morning Glory and at Talk that common sense will prevail and everything will turn out okay in the end. We've been talking about council tax because, of course, we found a clip from last year of Keir Starmer saying under the Labour government there will be no council tax rises, absolutely none, not a sausage, absolutely no chance at all, not a penny more was what he said. And I'm wondering why he has to say these things with such absolute and utter assuredness, as if he knows it's absolutely going to happen. And then when it doesn't happen, he doesn't mention it again. We've got Rachel Reeves and Ed Miliband still in a bit of a tiz about whether they should be a third runway at Heathrow. Nobody seems to be very sure whether they want growth or do they want net zero. Nobody's quite sure about that. We'll be talking, of course, about Kemi Badenoch, who was down at the COVID inquiry yesterday, talking about how the danger of misinformation going on. There seems to be a bit of an obsession with that at the moment in government. The Home Office reviews just come out. It's on the front page of the Times and the Telegraph, basically saying that the Home Office wants to have more scrutiny of people who might be right-wing because they don't agree with the government. Apparently, if you say two-tier policing, you could be a right-wing extremist. If you say that you operate inside of a mano space, I don't even know what that is really, you might be an extremist as well. I'm not sure. Misogyny is as bad, extreme misogyny apparently is as bad, according to the Home Office, as Islamic terrorism. Very strange. Also, they want to bring back non-crime hate crimes. Luckily, Yvette Cooper seems to have seen the light and has decided that actually maybe some of these recommendations are not very good. Joanna from Salisbury says, Miliband is an idiot. The penny has finally dropped. Clang, clang, clang. China has huge emissions because it produces all our manufacturing and building power stations to do it. Well, indeed. We'll take more of your calls on the council tax front as well. This, of course, is a Morning Glory. I'm Mike Graham. Let's get it on. Just for good measure, by the way, there's a giant sinkhole that's opened up in South Shields. I don't know what it's about. I just thought I'd mention it. Somebody might fall into it. Apparently 3 cars have fallen into it already. Working from home is bad for your health, according to a new report. And also, finally, this one from the Royal Navy. They've basically decided to change the name of HMS Agincourt, a submarine, because it might offend the French. Marvellous. Let's talk to John Rentoul, chief political commentator from The Independent. John, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
I can't think of anything to argue with you this week.
I know it's shocking, isn't it?
There's not really.
I mean, usually in this situation, I resort to saying that Tony Blair was actually a very good prime minister.
Excellent, yes.
But actually, you probably agree with that broadly.
Well, yeah. I mean, I do say this, and people really hate me for it. That aside from the bit at the end and the whole Iraq War situation, I thought he was a terrific prime minister.
Well, indeed, and I think this is beginning to dawn on people. I mean, every prime minister since has done their darndest to try and make him look good.
Yes. Well, the thing is, Keir Starmer wishes he was Tony Blair, I suppose. Gordon Brown probably also wished he was Tony Blair, but they probably both, in their own little private way, don't really like the fact that they want to be Tony Blair. They'd rather they didn't feel like that, but they do anyway.
Yeah, no, that's right, and I completely agree with you about Keir Starmer's problem of being over-emphatic. I mean, he keeps on talking about 100% this and 100% that, and no rise in taxes at all, no rise in council tax, not a penny on council tax.
Yeah, I mean,
all those things just too absolute.
It is, and I saw it yesterday, and obviously it was relevant yesterday because we've now got some councils who are going to put taxes up, council taxes particularly, by 10%, 15%, some 25% if you're in Windsor. Let's have a look. Just have a look at how he says it.
Labour would freeze council tax next year. Yes, you heard it right. Not a penny more on your council tax. Not a penny more than the bill you paid last year.
I mean, it's unnecessary, isn't it? There's so many different ways you could say it.
Well, except, I mean, I do remember that now. That that was a completely hypothetical situation. He was talking about hypothetically if Labour were in government now.
Yeah.
And this was what 18 months ago.
But hypothetically or not, they are in government now, and he's not doing it. Hypothetically.
No, but I mean, he did explicitly say at the time that he was not making a promise for what they would actually do after the election in government.
No, see, you and I have had
that's splitting
it
hairs,
is rather
taking people for fools, and I'm afraid there's he's done far too much of that, and it's come back to bite him.
Yes, I think so. But I mean, he's finally had the phone call from Donald Trump. I don't know how you feel about the length of that phone call, but my suggestion to you is that 45 minutes is perhaps a bit over generous given what the readout of the call was. I could have had that conversation in about 5 minutes, and I'm not suggesting that Downing Street are being economical with the truth, but it was suggested to me by a couple of listeners that maybe he was on hold for 40 of those 45 minutes and then finally got 5 minutes at the end.
No, well, the problem with those Downing Street readouts is that they don't contain anything that the other side says,
right?
Because that's a diplomatic convention. You don't brief your media as to what foreign leaders are saying.
Right. So although I've seen the White House readout's even shorter than the Downing Street one.
Yeah, but I suspect Donald Trump did most of the talking, and Keir Starmer listened. And Donald Trump, as we know, can talk the hind legs off a donkey, and can ramble all over all sorts of subjects. So goodness knows what he was talking about.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that they didn't appear to have been talking about any of the difficult subjects, such as Lord Mandelson's appointment as Washington ambassador, the Chagos Islands, the Ukraine war, and tariffs.
Yes.
They didn't seem to have discussed any of that.
No. And what are you hearing about? What are you hearing about the Mandelson scenario? Because that's quite interesting. Because presumably, I don't know whether the current ambassador is still in situ. The one that apparently, I think the Trump administration were quite happy. They were quite happy to keep her on. What is there a deadline of any kind? I mean, does the new ambassador have to be in place by a particular date?
No, we were told that Peter Mandelson was going to take over after the inauguration.
Right.
Which is now sort of 10 days ago, we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, what is interesting with Donald Trump is that we've never heard him say anything on this subject.
Right.
So we don't. I mean, all we've heard is talk from his courtiers,
right?
And all that's off the record as well. So we just don't know what the president thinks. But it was extraordinary that he said on the record that he thought, he was interviewed by the BBC. So he said he thought Keir Starmer was doing a good job, and they got along fine.
Right. But is that not part of the art of the deal that Trump does? He kind of messes around with people's heads. He wants. It's a bit like, certain management techniques that some of us may or may not have used in the past, where and it's a sort of carrot and stick approach where, he doesn't want to fall out with Keir Starmer, but he did, I think, keep him slightly on tenterhooks by not making the call until Sunday. And then shortly before he makes the call, he says something nice about him. So the call is already easier because you've already kind of broken the ice, as it were.
Yes, I mean that's Donald Trump through and through, isn't it? It makes it very hard to read what his real intentions are.
Right.
It keeps Keir Starmer on his toes. I mean, he must be really worried about the threat of tariffs. But
especially now that he's seen what Trump did to the Colombians when he got given a bit of short shrift from them. Suddenly he was like, right, well, you're going to get basically the full force of the United States of America coming down on you from a great height. And they were like, oh, okay then. Well, in that case, you go ahead.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's the thing about Donald Trump is he likes threatening tariffs. But he never actually has to impose them. I mean, if you look at his first term, he did impose a few limited tariffs on China and the EU and on Britain.
Yeah.
But they were very limited and they didn't last very long. So I think there's hope that we will not be driven into recession by the,
I mean, I know that you and I probably won't agree on whether Trump is a good thing or not, but I mean, he has been remarkably busy for a guy who's only been in power for a week, and for somebody of his age, I mean, he doesn't seem to stop. I mean, he sorted the Colombian thing out while he was on the golf course, and meanwhile before that he'd been in LA, he'd been in Las Vegas, he'd been to visit some people in North Carolina. This is all in the same 24-hour period. I don't know when he sleeps.
No, and he does seem to have made some difference. I mean, you've got to hand it to him that situation in Israel, the peace deal between Israel and Hamas.
Yeah.
I don't think that would have happened if he hadn't been out.
No question. No.
So that some good will come out of Donald Trump, and some bad things that he has threatened won't happen, like tariffs and the idea that he's going to force Ukraine to surrender to Putin. Obviously, he was going to end that war on day one, but that's another thing we haven't heard about. I mean, what's interesting about Trump is the thing, he does talk a lot and he does a lot and he's very active, but you can look at the things he doesn't do as well.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, I guess you can't do everything. Rome wasn't built in a day and all that kind of thing. Meanwhile, if they want to build a third runway at Heathrow, I'm reliably informed it would take at least 10 years, knowing British ingenuity. Why are they making this such a big thing to have a row about?
Well, because it's a symbol, isn't it? I mean, it's just part of the Rachel Reeves relaunch as the Chancellor for Growth, having scared. Having scared us all, and by talking the country down for 6 months, decided to come out all optimistic and say growth is possible. And everybody knows that the third runway is probably never going to be built.
No,
but the symbolism of being in favour of it, I think, might persuade businesses that she's serious about growth. And if they have a cabinet about it, even better.
Yeah, I mean, the trouble is, though, this performative stuff, we've seen it come and we've seen it go, and you can't just keep saying you're going to do things and never do them, and you can't also keep saying that you're never going to do things and then do them, because that seems to be the government that we currently have. Anything they said they would never do, they're doing. Everything they're promising to do, they're not doing.
No, well, this pension stuff that they are doing today, it sounds very boring and technical, allowing defined benefit pension funds to invest their surpluses more riskily.
Right.
That sort of sounds like the sort of thing that's not going to end well. But it could make quite a difference in the next few years.
Right.
And I think that will send a signal to business that she's serious about trying to promote growth.
I mean, I saw a piece yesterday, and I can't remember where I saw it, where it was talking about the price of bonds and the yields and all of that. And that does seem to have stabilised a bit since about 2 weeks ago, when it was all looking a bit desperate and we were looking like we were heading for some kind of financial crash. The markets seem to have sort of calmed down a bit. And I don't know whether that's something that she's done or whether it's just something that the markets have done for themselves.
Well, yeah, I think there was just a bit of a blip. I mean, there was just a bit of alarm about the fact that growth seemed to be so sluggish that she was going to have to come back with more tax rises, and people were pretty upset about that and thought that might lead to more borrowing as well. But yeah, no, that moment has passed, and it's possible that when the OBR makes its forecast in March, she'll just about scrape through and stick by her rules, in which case that'll be a huge victory for her.
Well, it will. And I wonder as well whether part of this whole kind of last week or so has been that the Trump effect has kind of sucked all the oxygen out of politics, so that, people are looking across the Atlantic and going, wow, look at what he's doing. And it's been a sort of relatively quiet week, I would say, politically for the government here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the distraction of all that is useful to the government, but I mean, they've got an awful lot of problems coming down the line. I mean, Angela Rayner's employment rights measures are obviously contrary to what Rachel Reeves is talking about, because that's like another burden for business.
Right.
And you've got to wonder whether they are actually going to go ahead with that.
Right. And also, I was told this morning by another commentator that there's an Angela Rayner kind of housing thing coming out soon as well, which will have a lot to do with how much money is going to be given to local councils, and whether council tax goes up as a result of that, because there might be a shortfall, is also going to be tough for Angela Rayner.
Well, true. I mean, nobody thinks that the Labour government's going to build 3 million houses. But I mean,
no, of course not, because they said they would. So of course they're not going to do it.
Well, but it's sort of what you were saying about performative policies, isn't it, Mike? At least their line is at least they're trying. I mean, it's a bit like their line on net zero. Nobody thinks they're going to decarbonise the electricity grid by 2030, which is now only four and a half years away now.
Right.
But they are hoping to get some credit for trying. The problem is a lot of people realise that that sort of dash to decarbonise is going to be extremely expensive, and they're hoping they won't succeed.
Right. And let me ask you finally about Lord Hermer, because I still think he's the next guy on the firing line. He's now come out and admitted that he does have conflicts of interest, and he's often had to recuse himself from giving advice to the government, which surely makes his role as the Attorney General not much use, doesn't it?
No, I mean, as a very recent lawyer, he's bound to have been involved in some cases where there will be conflicts, and these have been pointed out, such as he acted for Jerry Adams and for what's
Shamima Begum, right?
Yeah. So those are two very controversial cases.
Yeah.
He's done a very interesting interview yesterday on whether he thinks the government's policy towards Israel is compatible with international law, and he actually said it was, which will come as a surprise to quite a lot of people, I
including
think.
David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary.
Well, yes, who sounded very very doubtful about it when he was questioned in the House of Commons the other day. So. Yeah, no, you're right. He's Lord Hermer now, isn't he?
Yes,
he's in a very he's in a very tricky position.
Yeah.
I mean, the intersection of international law and government policy is one of those things where things can go wrong quite.
And it's also it's not I wouldn't expect him not to have recent legal connections to various clients, but it just my point I suppose is that if he's there to advise the government and to advise the Prime Minister on matters of the law, but that he's conflicted because of some of the work that he's done recently, then he can't really do his job properly.
Well, I think he can most of the time. Put it that way. He's got deputies.
Most of the time is all very well, but I mean, he is in the cabinet. He's supposed to be doing it all the time, isn't he?
Well, yes. But
I'm just thinking it's been a few weeks since we had a cabinet resignation. It's time
you want a cabinet resignation, and you want one today.
I'd like one before the end of January. Can we do that?
Yeah. I bet it'll be somebody we haven't thought of.
Okay, all right, somebody that has got a conviction we don't know about, very possibly.
Yeah, exactly.
John, delightful to see you. Thank you very much indeed. John Rentoul, chief political commentator from The Independent. Got this from a couple of council tax refuseniks. One from Graham in Mid-Wales, who says, "Great show, Mike. Regards council tax. I'm also opting out of paying any increases. We get our bin emptied every 3 weeks. The road outside my house is crumbling. I don't use schools. I don't see any coppers about, and my high street is now full of barbers, and that's just the start. So no pay rises for the councillors off me." And one from Ellie, who says, "Morning, Mike. I too am only paying what we paid last year, which was also too much. Nothing has improved. No more services, so they won't be getting a pay rise off me. They can't have what I haven't got." Simples. I think that's fair. Fair enough. I think there'll be maybe like the poll tax. Maybe people just go on the streets and say we're not doing it. We're just not paying it anymore. 9:20.
basically an attempt to erase our history. I think probably the army at Agincourt wasn't diverse enough. That is the problem. And this is absolutely ridiculous. It won't be the Navy chiefs doing this. This will be political pressure from this regime that we have at the moment.
Yeah.
And it's ridiculous. I mean...
It's ridiculous that anyone even had a nanosecond's thought about this. The fact that it's actually gone through various memos and committees is mind-blowing.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 9:24. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. Steve says, so the biggest threat of misinformation came from the so-called experts and their deliberately skewed charts every night on TV, designed to terrify us all into compliance. And Richard in Cambridgeshire says, Mike, thank you for holding up a light to this left-wing crime family run by Keir Starmer. I could list all their broken promises, but the text would be too long. Best morning show by a mile. Well, thank you very much indeed. We've got lots more great messages coming in every single day. 87222 is where you send them to. You can send us a voice note as well to 0344 499 1000. That's, of course, on WhatsApp. Let's talk now, though, to Sir Simon Mail, retired British Army General. Sir Simon, we've got plenty to talk about this morning, including, of course, the state of our nation's defences, particularly with Keir Starmer sort of more or less saying he's going to buck the trend. He's not going to go for 2.5%, something he said he would do. There seems to be an awful lot of arguing going on about this, and I guess a lot's going to depend on Donald Trump and how much pressure he puts on Europe.
Yeah, indeed, Mike. Very good morning to you and your listeners, viewers. It's a classic thing. Your previous interviewee was talking about this. On the one hand, we're pushing for growth. On the other hand, we're driving for a close relationship with the Americans. And on an issue that's of real importance to the people of the United Kingdom, yes. Our allies, our enemies around the world, and particularly the Americans, we step back from, committing to a commensurate sum of money for defence in a particularly volatile, dangerous world. And again, they're just reaching out to too many audiences, and of course they've boxed themselves into a corner economically. Because the money's going on, dare I say, union salaries. It's going on paying off a huge debt because we've run up a deficit. It's going on housing migrants. It's going on everything the British population do not want, and yet it's not available for things which are the primary responsibility of a government.
Well, it sounds very straightforward when you say it like that it would be common sense to change an awful lot of these policies and actually do things that the public would want to see. But for some reason, the Labour government seems incapable of understanding what the public wants to see.
I think it reflects, dare I say, the tensions within the government, and you referred to them again. Driving for net zero, employment laws that are going to put further burdens. I'm not an economist or run a business, but I do feel very, very strongly that everything they do is not producing the sort of growth that would allow the government to have some room to make difficult choices. And paying more for defence is a difficult choice. I understand that, but any responsible government just needs to look at the world as it is, and our very close and important relationship with the Americans and other allies in Europe as well, and say that we, the United Kingdom, should be leading on that. Is our responsibility as well as our requirement to do so on defence and security.
Well, yes, because Trump hasn't really yet set his sights properly. I mean, he's said a few things, and he's made one statement about wanting to end this ridiculous war to Vladimir Putin. But, I mean, he hasn't really sort of started stretching his legs, if you like, in Ukraine. And once he does start doing that, I suspect he's going to want part of Western Europe, or certainly a lot of Western Europe, to go along with him. And
quite rightly. And Obama and Bush and Biden have all, and Trump in his last incarnation as number 45, all said this. Yeah. And I'm sympathetic. We, US taxpayer, has shouldered the burden of defence and your security and your prosperity, and you've taken a overlong holiday from history and taken that peace dividend again for far too long in order to pay for, the welfare state and your national health services. And the time has come. And actually, the key to saying we're committing to paying more in defence is, of course, using it as leverage with somebody like someone like Trump, who's very transactional, to say we're going to put our money where our mouth is here. Oh, that trade deal, that would be really helpful. I'll help you to help me, and you can then point to the United Kingdom as a leading example of what Europe should be doing across the piece. So we should be leveraging it. Instead, we're going to get the worst of all worlds, no more money into defence, and looked on as a weak link in the Western alliance.
Yeah, I mean, one of the strangest things I've seen today as well, and who's seen this, it comes from General Robert Brieger, who's the European Union's top general, according to this, head of he's from Austria, head of the bloc's military committee, says that the European Union should be sending some troops to Greenland just in case Donald Trump decides to invade it. I mean, this guy lost the plot.
No, funnily enough, Mike, I think what he's trying to do, and I did read it because I thought, everybody said, if Trump invades Greenland, would NATO, would it be Article 5? I think it's absolutely typical Trump. What he's actually saying, Trump, in his case, is Greenland is really, really important. And you, the Danes, are not investing enough in it to make it secure. It is very much part of our security, the security of the Western world. What Brieger, I think, has done is try to acknowledge that he's absolutely right from one point of view, but make sure this, or try to suggest this shouldn't be an American takeover of Greenland, but we should share the responsibility for making sure that Greenland is a really important part of the overall Western deterrence, etc. And it's, well, there's your picture of, they're breaking over the old Northwest Passage. Yeah. There's a huge amount of minerals there that the Chinese and the Russians might want. There's all sorts of espionage and spying. Any number of things that, if you look at a map of the world from the top, as it were, you see Greenland is a really important bit of real estate.
Yeah.
We haven't needed to worry about it in some ways for quite a long time.
So once again, Trump has kind of put his finger on this, and he's pulled it out of oblivion, if you like, and suddenly got everybody talking about it.
Well, of course, if you're a Greenlander, and I'm not going to claim to be an expert on Greenland or Danish politics, but you can see, you probably think, my goodness, we're sitting on all these minerals. We've got a huge amount of connection with the United States. They invest a lot in our defence anyway. This might be a good, and Denmark's a long way away and never really, taken us terribly seriously. It's a historical link. There would be some advantages, and even some of the Danes have said if there was a referendum in Greenland, Greenland may well choose to either go independent or at least by going independent then solidify its relationship with America. And because the amount of money that would be invested there.
Yeah, I mean, it could be another sort of Diego Garcia, and then, we could sell it off a few years down the road.
Well, hence another, there's America doubling down on protecting its security, albeit in a typical Trumpian way. And here we've got a government sort of handing away strategic assets in a most bizarre way, not just in itself, but, threatening our own relationship with the Americans again.
Yes, quite. I thought I'd just ask you one final question about the story in the Times today about the HMS Agincourt, which is an Astute-class submarine, which I'm sure you probably know. Apparently, we decided to change the name of it because we didn't want to upset the French. I mean, what on earth is going on? I mean, surely the French can probably handle the fact. Somebody said to me, the French haven't got any boats named after any battles that they won because they never won any.
Well, of course, that's a little unfair because they've got Gare d'Austerlitz and they've got Pont Jena and they've got any number where either the Austrians or the Germans or the Russians could take real offence.
Right.
But it's bonkers that you make this sort of decision and nobody raises it then and says, are you sure?
Right.
The worst thing, again, is to name it Agincourt and then stop naming it Agincourt. Again, who benefits? The French don't feel any...
No.
They're not worried. But the government looks stupid. I dare say the Royal Navy are really embarrassed. And I think I saw my old friend Chris Parry on your one stage making a very, very similar point.
Yes.
The French got quite enough self-confidence to tackle that, frankly.
It really is absolutely unbelievable. But, yeah, absolutely. So, Simon, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. So Simon Mailed, a retired British Army general, on the subject of all manner of things, including Greenland, of course, which is suddenly going to be a story in the next few months, it would seem to me. And as he says, who knows, perhaps the people of Greenland would rather be closer to America than they are to Denmark. I mean, why wouldn't you? For heaven's sake. They're about to spend 1.6 billion on security, by the way, in Greenland. But there we are. Coming up after the break, Paul Morland, UK's leading demographer and author, is going to tell us about some new UK population figures. Also, we're going to bring you some more on that front page of The Sun this morning, which is about the referee who got his marching orders, if you might remember, red-carded, you might say. I can't believe I haven't used that before. He was red-carded for being caught on camera saying disparaging things about Liverpool Football Club, about Liverpudlians in general, about Jurgen Klopp. He was also spotted snorting some cocaine as well. And he's got an excuse. He's going to explain exactly why it all happened and why he feels bad about it. That's all coming next on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 9:35. We are here, of course, until 10 o'clock, and then we will be passing the baton on to Julie Hartley-Brewer over here shortly. Baz in West Bromwich says this. Good morning, Mike. Great show as usual. It's the same when D-Day was on GMB, and the BBC never mentions men running up the beach in Normandy. It was always military personnel or military people. Absolutely disgusting. That's also on the news that we played you earlier on in the show about Good Morning Britain yesterday, who, in their introduction to a piece on Auschwitz, somehow managed not to mention the word Jewish or Jews, just called 6 million people who had been exterminated, strangely. A bit of breaking news for you before we speak to Paul Morland. The UK population is projected to reach 72.5 million by mid-2032. That's up from 67.6 million in mid-2022, driven almost entirely by net migration. This is according to the Office for National Statistics. It will come as no surprise to you. The level of net migration is projected to average 340,000 per year from mid-2028 onwards, and that's lower than current levels. I'm not quite sure what they've got that from, where they've got that from. We'll find out from Paul Morland. But basically, the numbers of deaths and births is pretty much the same. So the increase in population to 72.5 million, which I think we're probably already at, to be honest, is going to be down purely and simply to migration. Let's have a look at the front page of The Sun, though. We talked about this earlier on in the show. It's a picture of a referee called David Coote. You might remember last year he was sacked from his job as a top-level referee, Premier League referee, and also a UEFA referee as well. He was sacked because of the rant that he got himself involved in on video, talking about Liverpool boss Jurgen Klopp at the time, talking about Liverpudlians in general, talking about Liverpool Football Club. He was also spotted snorting a white powder. The Sun headline says, "I was too scared to come out as gay. Drug was my escape. I was not sober when I made the Klopp rant." Let's have a look at the interview right here with the Sun.
The personal context, for me, it goes way back, and relates to struggles that I've had over the course of time around my self-esteem, and that relates to my sexuality. So I'm gay, and I have struggled with feeling proud of being me over a long period of time. I've felt a deep sense of shame.
David Coote there talking to The Sun exclusively about his fear of coming out in the macho world of the Premier League. A lot of people suggesting to me this morning that perhaps he's just sort of covering himself because he doesn't want to take any more criticism for the stuff that he did. But let's see. Let's talk to Paul Borland now. He's UK's leading demographer and author, because we've got some new figures, which I just told you about. 72.5 million is the expected and projected population figure for this country by mid-2032. That's up from 67.6 million in mid-2022, so that's 10 years on. Will have risen by, not far off 5 million. I wonder if that number is being a bit underestimated, but let's find out from Paul what he makes of it. Paul, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
It seems that the net migration is the driver for this increase. They're suggesting that 340,000 per year is going to be the net migration figure. That's quite low compared to what we've been getting recently, isn't it?
Well, there are two things going on, obviously. There's the balance of births and deaths, and then there's net migration. So on the balance of births and deaths, they are now almost entirely matching each other. And that's because we've got the boomers, the boomer generation, starting to die. A lot of people born at an age now that there's quite more deaths than you might have expected, and a big drop-off in births. That's the big surprise that happened in 2024. We thought it was some years before births were going to be outstripped by deaths. It's come earlier, and it's come earlier essentially because people are having far fewer children than we expected. Now, that balance is really, really small. The fact that it exists at all is significant because we'd expect births to outstrip deaths normally. So the fact that it's come early and it's going to accumulate and accelerate is important. Again, but it's still very small. So the population would be aging, but roughly flat. The real delta, the real thing that makes a difference is immigration. Now, the ONS has no more idea than you or I what the real level of immigration is today. And we know it's a hell of a lot more than 300,000. And more importantly, if you're projecting forward where it's going to go. Now, if we had an election tomorrow and we had a different sort of government and a different sort of policy, the government wanted to bring it down and were prepared to take the legislative and constitutional possibly steps to do so, that can happen. So this is not a given. They are taking a best guess, and that's the best they can do based on what they think the political pressures might be. But it could stay at 1 million a year. It could become negative. That is down to the government, and in a democracy, it's down to the electorate.
Yes. I mean, the one thing I suppose we do know that's happening, and there was some sign of it coming towards the start, I think, of this year, was when Rishi Sunak banned the additional sort of relatives of those people coming here to study and said that they couldn't come with them. That number appeared to drop, didn't it? The numbers of people coming on student visas seemed to go down because they couldn't bring their families with them. So, I mean, I suppose if you're looking for any positives, if you like, in the reduction of immigration, that might be one.
Well, there are various quick wins. I mean, had Rwanda gone ahead, for example, although not many people would have left, I suspect, that probably would have acted as a major disincentive for people coming over on the boats.
Right.
You're absolutely right about dependence of students. Similarly, if a government came in and decided we don't need a hugely bloated university sector full of people from overseas, very often not studying very serious degrees and getting in and not going, that would also have, if that's what the government wanted to do, that would also have a big effect. If we decided to change the level of earnings at which people could come into the country, for example, if we said we only want workers, or if we introduced a sort of Gastarbeiter type scheme where people came in for 5 years to help out and then went home. There are all sorts of things we could do. The idea that we cannot control our population and that we cannot control the immigration level is completely untrue. It requires will, it requires decisiveness, and it requires the people of the country or the government to have a view on what it wants.
Yes.
But neither the ONS nor you nor I are going to determine it.
I mean, the interesting thing for me is that the figure from 2022, which is 67.6 million, if you look at what we know from, say, the last 2 or 3 years, even bringing it up to date, you know, our net migration figure has been somewhere around 770,000, isn't it? So, I mean, you could add into that, say, another 2,000 or so. I mean, you're not far off 70 million right now, I would say. And even with kind of taking a broad brush approach to how many people we don't know are here, I think 70 million is about where we are now.
That's probably not an unreasonable guess. I mean, you know, we really don't know. And the fact we don't know itself tells us something about the political priorities. But I do think there's a lot of discussion of immigration, and that is the really important issue in terms of numbers year to year and decade to decade. But I think there's another huge issue here that we're not discussing nearly enough, and that's the great drop-off in the number of people having children.
Yes.
The fertility rate per couple is now below 1.5. It's the lowest it's ever been in our history. That's a huge can of worms. There's a big discussion about why that is the case. But it is building up a huge problem for us in the future. We're going to have a rapidly aging population. It's going to create a demand for ever more immigration. And unless we do something about it now, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. And what that means is we're going to have fewer workers, more retirees, more spent on pensions, more spent on social care and health care. It's very hard to have any kind of decline in taxation or any kind of competent government balanced budget when you've got that kind of demography. The demography we've got because of having too few children, number one, is itself sucking in huge numbers of immigrants because we're short of workers. And number two is ensuring we have a stagnant economy for decades ahead.
Well, that's true. And it's also happening in America as well, because I saw Vance, the vice president, there talking about it the other day, saying we need more babies in America. And it's a Western malaise, isn't it? Because a lot of younger women now are choosing not to have kids at all, not just choosing to have them later in life, but just not choosing to have any.
Well, a couple of things I would say. First of all, it's not just a Western malaise. China, Japan, Jamaica has a similar fertility rate to us. This is a global phenomenon. The second thing I would say is hats off to J.D. Vance. In Britain, we've had too few children, so below replacement rate, for 50 years, more than 50 years now. And no front-ranking government minister has ever had anything to say on it until Keir Starmer finally spoke on the matter. And what did he say? Not my business. I'm not going to force people to have children. Well, of course, he's not going to force people to have children. But we've never had a front-ranking government minister who has said, this is a problem, this is an issue, let's start to talk about it as a society. And unfortunately, it's only people on the fringes of politics and people like me who are talking about it. It's still seen as a weird thing to talk about in this country. We've got to change that if we're going to fix it.
Yeah, well, listen, you can always talk about it on here whenever you like, Paul, because I'm very much in agreement with you. And also, you know, we need to talk about things here at Talk that other people don't, because I'm sick of people demonstrating how we should be talking about things, what we should be talking about, and when we should be talking about them. So feel free to come on. I've had 4 kids, so I've done my bit. Thank you very much indeed. Paul Borland from the UK's leading demographer and author, with the news that the UK population projected to reach 72.5 million by mid-2032. I think it's way under that, because I reckon if we had 67.6 million in 2022, then we've got 70 now, because the last 2 or 3 years have been increases. Net migration has increased by somewhere like 750,000. So that's another 2 million right there. I think the population is growing even faster than we know. And it's all down to immigration. Simple. 0344 499 1000 is the number. It's 9:47. Doug says this. Good morning, Mike. So we have council tax rises to pay for housing for the immigrants that were in the hotels before Rain had closed them. Water bills to increase. Bonuses and dividends will still be paid. Energy prices will go up in April as well. Will we ever benefit? The shareholders are getting dividends and bosses like Dale Vince are making big fortunes. And one from Carl, this is an old one, but a good one. Don't you think Starmer sounds about like Zippy off a play school on TV back in the 1970s? He does. A lot of people have said that. I said yesterday, I think that he's actually morphing, as is Rachel Reeves. Both of them are kind of morphing into one person. Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer, they sort of sound the same, don't they? This, of course, is Morning Glory.
Government borrowing costs hit a 27-year high, and the pound is taking a pounding. Gloomy economic data is expected to show inflation and growth are off course.
Let me ask again, and can you please be clear, will Rachel Reeves be your Chancellor for the duration of this parliament?
Rachel Reeves is doing a fantastic job. She has my full confidence, and she has the full confidence of the entire party.
Can Rachel Reeves hold on as Chancellor?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 9:51. We're here until 10 o'clock, of course. Julie Hartley-Brewer will be along shortly to tell us what's coming up on her show. Stuart says, Mike, the Home Office don't mention anti-Semitism or the Palestinian hate marches. The Home Office needs to attend some racism courses. And Tony, with a reminder of that Chinese story, Chinese DeepSeek AI has wiped $1 trillion off the value of US tech stocks in 24 hours. It only cost $6 million to start up. Yeah, I mean, Greg Swenson seemed pretty relaxed about that story. He said the tech businesses in the US are probably overvalued and have probably lost a bit of value that they could afford to lose anyway. Before we take a couple of calls, let me just bring this to your attention. A voice note from Joe as well. Let's hear that.
Morning, Mike. Just calling in regards to Keir Starmer's comments on not
increasing council tax. I'm just wondering if there's anyone out there that actually did vote for them on that basis that would want to try and test it in court for the fact that it sounds like a legally binding verbal contract to me. It's quite a clear statement. You give me your vote and you won't have a council tax increase. Someone should test it in the court, I think.
Not a penny more, were his very words. Well, according to John Rentoul, it was hypothetical. I don't think so. Yeah, just before we take these calls, because I want to talk to Mark in Glasgow and Tarquin in London, here's the thing. Selena Gomez, you might not have heard of her. She's an actress, right, and musician, or singer, shall we say. Started off as a child actress, I think, in Disney, and has kind of grown up playing in a few movies that I've never seen. But I kind of know who she is. She's very upset with Donald Trump because, of course, only at the weekend did he send a whole bunch of Colombian criminals back to Colombia. Because he doesn't want any convicted criminals from a foreign country in the United States of America. She has faced absolute and utter ridicule, quite rightly, for this post that she put on social media.
I just want to say that I'm so sorry. All my people are getting attacked. The children. I don't understand. I'm so sorry. I wish I could do something, but I can't. I don't know what to do. I'll try everything, I promise.
Sorry. Oh, dear. I don't know what to do. I wish I could do something. Well, you could do something. You shut up. For a start. She's now removed that post. Here's what Tom Homan, who's in charge of immigration, had to say in response.
The Hollywood celebrity who posted it has now deleted it, I think because probably she faced a lot of backlash for it, noting even the New York Times and Fox News polls show that a majority of American respondents are in favor of deportations of criminals and gang members. She posted a video sobbing. She was crying in it. She said, all my people are getting attacked, with the picture of a Mexican flag. Again, she has now taken that down. But what do you say to those who are out there saying that these are everyday people, these are families that are being attacked and dragged out of their homes? How do you respond to that?
I don't think we arrested any families. We've arrested public safety threats and national security threats, bottom line. And look, President Trump won the election on this one issue, securing our border and saving lives.
That's exactly what he did, and that's exactly what he's doing. People, of course, on the internet have had a bit of fun with this. Here's a version of her weeping.
Guys, I'm sorry, but all my people are getting attacked. All of the innocent rapists and murderers and criminals and drug dealers are getting rounded up and just kicked out of this country like they're objects. I'm sorry.
Dear me, what an absolute state. That's funnier than her one, actually, which is obviously hers was terribly genuine. Let's go to the calls, though. I want to hear about the population statistics. Here's Mark in Glasgow. Mark, very good morning to you.
Yeah, morning, mate.
How are you doing?
I'm fine. I'm just watching Selena Gomez. I think she needs to up the meds.
I think so, yeah. Absolutely ridiculous. Incredible. What do you make of these population stats?
Well, having done a little bit of homework on this, what you've seen is that for the last 40 years, women have been pushed into the workplace, I guess, to raise more taxation for governments. But the sum total of that is women are leaving it later in life to have kids, and then they're discovering, crikey, if I stop working and have to put my kids into a nursery, etc., I'm screwed. So they're just not having kids.
Right.
Meanwhile, migrant families are having 3s and 4s and 5s.
Mm.
That's the problem.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, the problem is that the birth rate is significantly down, but I also think they haven't counted enough of the migrants either, because if we're looking at a figure of 2022, 67.6 or whatever it was, to me, we're more like 70 million now.
I agree. The government's various colours are all the same. I hate to sound like I'm a reform supporter. I'm not into any political party, but God, we need some truth. And we need some action.
We do. I think truth would be great. Would be a good place to start. Thanks very much indeed. Tarquin, I should say, is in London. Hi, Tarquin.
Morning, Michael.
Morning, sir. What can I do for you?
Well, I was right at the front of the programme when you were still talking about the that policy exchange report. I think that Yvette Cooper allegedly has decided not to implement in any way, shape or form, from what you were saying.
Well, so she says, but I mean, well, watch this space, I think.
Yes. Now, I think that what we are actually witnessing here, where she is they are demonising anybody who has any remote common sense whatsoever, which is effectively what they're doing. Basically means that what we are witnessing is the last death throes, the death rattle of the left in the run-up to the next election. It will be painful for us, and I don't know what we're going to have to endure in the next 4 years, Mike, but we the people, we need to have the equivalent of the First Amendment. So clearly we do not have free speech as we assumed we did. We don't. We need to have that in law now, proper English common law, because they're going to basically take the pee out of us forever after unless we do. So that's our first port of call.
Well, I keep hearing the word misinformation, which is slightly troubling, because they could call anything misinformation. I mean, we've already seen, Kemi Badenoch down at the COVID inquiry talking about misinformation during COVID, most of which actually came from the government. Right?
Anything dissenting from the party line, isn't it? That is
exactly, and
so,
they could invent anything as misinformation and say, "Well, sorry, you've just been talking and misinformation. That makes you a right-wing extremist, so we're going to lock you up."
Treating us all like children, aren't
they? Exactly. Shocking. Absolutely shocking. Tarquin, it's good thank you for your call. Julie Hartley-Brewer's here. Very good morning.
I mean, shocking is the absolute word. What I love is the Home Office, let's get some people to do a review. Okay, now it's going to look bad for us, so we're not accepting it.
Not going to do it.
If you've got people in the Home Office doing a review of terror threats and extremism, and they think that, the alleged grooming gangs, so not real, the people are exploiting it, and they think that should have more investigation of non-crime hate incidents and more worrying about incels rather than Islamist extremists. Those people are a danger to us because people are going to die because of their madness.
Exactly.
And we're paying their wages.
And I don't agree with Trevor Phillips about a lot of things, but we had him on earlier and he said, this is not a mistake that you can make because people will die as a result.
Trevor used to be very sane on most things.
He did.
I'm an old friend of Trevor's, but he's gone woke at Sky.
He's gone a little bit woke.
His reports and his TV investigations over years have actually all been very solid.